Chapter 887. Zhang Yan stayed on Huandan Peak for 4 months and absorbed more than half of the hidden qi in the mountain. He felt that he could stop, so he retracted his mana. Yin Zhaokong sensed this place and knew that there was at least 30% of the qi of the earth left under the mountain. He nodded to himself. With this remnant qi, if there was no external invasion, after thousands of years, this place could become a blessed land again. He had been cultivating on Huandan Peak since he was young. Even though he was about to leave, he could not bear to see it become a dead land. After Zhang Yan put away Yan Zhu's bottle, he sat down to regulate his breathing. After a while, his mana recovered. He stood up and bowed to Yin Zhaokong. "Thank you for waiting. I still have something to do, so I might have to wait a little longer." Yin Zhaokong smiled and returned the greeting. "Even though I am in a hurry to leave this world, but I have waited for hundreds of years, a little longer is not a big deal." Zhang Yan nodded and flicked his finger. A talisman ray shot into the sky. About an hour later, a beam of light came from the south and landed on the peak of the mountain. The light dissipated and Shen Zixin walked out in her white robe. She had no makeup on her face, but her face was radiant like a lotus under the moon. She came forward and bowed. "Greetings, Taoist friends." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I've invited you here today because of the matter that we've agreed upon previously." He waved his sleeve lightly and a small bottle flew over. This was the qi of Earth Yin that he had split previously. It could be given to Li Mountain sect to return the favor. Shen Zixin took it, and as soon as she touched it, she knew that the spiritual essence inside was not small. She hurriedly expressed her thanks. She felt a little pity and thought to herself, Zhenren Zhang's aptitude is great. He will definitely become a grotto heaven in the future. If it wasn't because the qi of Earth Yin is too important and Li Mountain sect can't compete with others, I would rather keep this favor for the future. Yin Zhaokong asked, "Taoist friend, I have been in the mountain these few days and do not know the situation outside. Does Taoist friend know how Zhangxiu and Hihai sects are doing?" Shen Zixin hesitated for a moment. She glanced at Zhang Yan and said concisely, "The mountain gate has been destroyed. All disciples are to disperse." That day, the elders of the two sects attacked the mountain. However, he had underestimated Yin Zhaokong's abilities, and he had also made plenty of preparations in the sect. He had originally come with an aggressive momentum, but in the end, he returned in defeat. Of course, Jiang Heng of Yuanyang sect would not let go of such a good opportunity. Join forces with the cultivators from the sect who came to help. All of them were killed on the way. Then, they invaded the mountain gate. However, he was afraid that Yu Xiao would be envious and find an excuse to take the essence, so he distributed some to the disciples of the various sects who entered this world. Even Li Mountain sect received a little. Since she received benefits, she was not willing to speak behind their backs. When Yin Zhaokong heard this, he sighed and cupped his hands. "Thank you for telling me." After the gathering of qi, Zhang Yan had no intention to stay any longer. He discussed with Yin Zhaokong for a while, then they rode on the traveling light together and headed towards the entrance of the realm. A few hours later, the two of them passed through the small world and arrived at the place where Duqin sect was staying. There were disciples on duty in the outer world. When they saw the sect master, they were all happy and immediately reported it. When Lin Zhaofeng and Mo Zhaoyue heard about it, they hurried over to greet him. After saying goodbye to each other, they thanked Zhang Yan profusely. Zhang Yan said a few humble words, and seeing that there was nothing else important, he was about to bid farewell and leave. However, Yin Zhaokong called out to him and took out a jade slip from his sleeve. He handed it over and said, "Since fellow Taoist likes to collect erosion inscriptions, then this poor Taoist will make the decision to give this to fellow Taoist. You must accept." When Lin Zhaofeng saw the jade scroll, his expression changed. However, when he saw the sect master's solemn expression, he hesitated to speak. Zhang Yan smiled, took it, and put it in his sleeve. He cupped his hands and said, "It looks ordinary, but since fellow Taoist is sincerely giving it to me, I will accept it." Yin Zhaokong sincerely said, "My sect is indebted to fellow Daoists' help to escape from that cage. A mere jade scroll is not enough to repay you. In the future, if you need my Duqin sect's help, you only need to send a message." Zhang Yan nodded and bade farewell before leaving in a streak of light. Lin Zhaofeng looked at the rainbow in the sky and turned back, saying, "Senior brother, what you gave to Daoist Zhang is the jade scroll that Master used to carry around with him?" Yin Zhaokong sighed, "Ever since Master obtained this item, it has been in my Duqin sect for nearly 1,000 years. Many elders and fellow disciples have borrowed it to study, but no one has been able to see anything. Perhaps it is not fated with us, so I might as well give it to fellow Daoist Zhang as a favor." This item was originally obtained by the previous sect master from the secret palace after the destruction of Shanghua sect. However, the contents of the scroll were written in eroded text, and he had never been able to comprehend it. Later on, when it was passed down to him, he still couldn't see anything. It was only when he heard that Zhang Yan was searching for eroded text that he remembered this item. However, he didn't immediately give it to Zhang Yan, only preparing to take it out at a critical moment as a favor. Lin Zhaofeng chuckled and said, "That's true. You have to give up before you gain. I've heard about fellow Daoist Zhang's status in the Dark Azure sect. Senior brother, do you know that this fellow Daoist has an impressive background? In terms of status, he's only below those Reverend Mammoth Xiang. I've heard that he's already searching for a way to break through to the next realm." Yin Zhaokong's eyes lit up, saying, "I wonder what the elephant sage looks like. Will we have the luck to see what it looks like?" Lin Zhaofeng said, "We will have to stay here for a long time. I think there will be a chance." The Crossing Dust sect wanted to establish a new branch, but it couldn't be done overnight. They still needed to send people to the East Sea to scout and choose a place to stay. Even if it was a short period of time, it would still take several years. During this period, they would need to be neighbors with Qinsang School. Yin Zhaokong looked down the mountain. Under the rising sun, the mountains reflected a golden glow, showing off the endless beautiful scenery. He said with a double meaning, "We can't do it, but the disciples of the younger generation can." In the northeast of Longyuan Lake, there were 3 continents, Falling Night, Yanlong, and Xinlei, all under the name of the Dengyang Qin clan. Among them, the Yanlong continent was the residence of the branch family disciples, while the Falling Night continent was the place where the Qin clan's direct descendants gathered. As for the Xinlei continent, it was under the Junming grotto heaven of Qingyuan Guanghua. It was the place where perfected Qin cultivated. Apart from a few nephews that he valued, ordinary people were not allowed to enter. But today, one of the top 10 disciples, Chen Feng, was summoned to the continent by a decree. The highest point of the Xinlei continent was the Unfalling Mountain. This mountain was also a Dharma treasure. After being refined by the second-generation sect leader, the qi surged through the clouds and pierced through the sky. Therefore, there were often turbulence around the mountain, rocks spiraling, some even came from beyond the second heaven. After a long time, it became a natural barrier. Therefore, when he was on his way here, he had to be careful. After climbing up the mountain stairs, he walked into a grass hut. He saw Daoren lying on a bamboo couch with his back facing him. He seemed to be sleeping soundly. Chen Feng bowed and said, "Second uncle. Do you have any orders for me to come here?" Doran's body moved. He seemed to be awakened. He slowly sat up and looked at Chen Feng with sleepy eyes. "Nephew, you are here." He slowly took out a letter from beside the couch and placed it on the table in front of him. "It's from Perfected Qin. Take a look." Chen Feng's expression was solemn. Since the clan had put so much effort into exchanging for him, it must not be a small matter. He stepped forward to take it, and after reading it, he inadvertently frowned. The content was unexpected. The Dingyang Zhou clan wanted to ask his Qin clan to borrow Juanyang's spiritual essence and exchange it with 2 heavenly 100 reincarnation mountains. But, why did he have to decide this matter? He was originally a person who didn't care about trifles and did things casually. However, as his status rose, he couldn't help but have more concerns. He asked cautiously, "May I know what the Zhou clan wants to do by borrowing Jun Yang's essence energy?" Daoren said slowly, "I shouldn't be the one to say this. When the time comes, nephew, you will know. However, since nephew needs to deal with this matter, I will give you some pointers. There are many uses for Jun Yang's essence energy. However, there is a way to create a heavenly passage that requires this item. Do you understand?" Chen Feng listened and nodded his head. The Xianmen aristocratic families moved around frequently. Many clans were related by marriage. Although the Qin clan and the Dingyang Zhou clan didn't have such a relationship, they still had many interactions. Just from the letter alone, it was clear that a junior of the Zhou clan wanted to advance further and came to borrow Jun Yang's essence energy. However, when he thought about it again, he felt that it wasn't normal. The purpose behind it wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface. He read the letter again and asked, "Does Perfected Chen have anything else to say?" Doran's eyelids drooped. He looked like he could fall asleep at any moment. He said, "Perfected Chen only said that you will be in charge of this matter. He didn't say anything else." Chen Feng pondered for a moment. He knew about the 36 mountain treasures. They were treasures that the clan had refined for thousands of years. They were only missing 2 heavenly 100 revolution stones, and they would be completed. They were very important to the Qin clan. It seemed possible, but when he thought about it again, he was shocked. Although he didn't know how much Jun Yang's essence energy the clan had, from what the Zhou clan needed, the clan might not be able to take it out. They would definitely ask the sect for it. With Perfected Chen's reputation, they might be able to lend it out. However, if they gave it to the Zhou clan, if there were cultivators in the sect who wanted to create a heavenly passage, it would be delayed. And the people who had the chance to create a heavenly passage were the eldest disciple, Qi Yuntian. The second was the previous head of the 10 great disciples, the current side hall master of the Duzhen Hall, Zhang Yan. As for Qi Yuntian, he had entered the spirit point to cultivate. No matter what he needed, it was impossible for him to lend it out. Then, the only person who could be implicated in this matter was Zhang Yan. He looked up at Daoren and said, "Second uncle, if we want to do this, we have to inform Perfected Zhang." Elder Chen didn't express his opinion. "Do what you think should be done. The clan won't interfere." Chen Feng was suddenly in a dilemma. Although he was one of the 10 great disciples in the sect, now that Zhang Yan had entered the Duzhen Hall, their positions in the sect were very different. If he were to step forward, he wouldn't be able to do anything. He thought to himself, "Looks like I need to ask Senior Hua to step forward." As he thought of this, an idea flashed in his mind. Maybe Perfected Chen had this intention when he asked him to do this. After Hua Xian became the side hall master, he used the excuse of seclusion and didn't come out for many years. Even Qin Nyangzi couldn't see him. At this stage, the Qin clan didn't have many ways to restrict him. Especially when Elder Chen was about to be reincarnated, no one dared to ask for trouble. Chen Feng thought about it and felt that it was worth a try. He raised his head and said, "Since Perfected Chen has entrusted it to me, I will do my best." Chapter 888. Duzhen Hall, Xuanze Ocean Realm, Tide Observing Pavilion. Zhang Yan stood in the middle of the hall with his sleeves behind his back. Several feet away from him were 9 tall stone tablets. These were the 9 star tablets left behind by the ancient Vedanta. Back then, when he challenged the Heavenly Gate, he used these tablets to compete with others in erosion runes. In the blink of an eye, 300 years had passed. Now that he saw it again, he felt a little emotional. A mortal's body only had 100 years of lifespan. At that time, one's teeth would fall out and one's bones would weaken. As a Yuaniing cultivator, although he could live for 1,000 years, it was only 10 times longer than a normal person's and he still felt that it was too short. Only by seeing the Grand Tao could one live forever. As his thoughts changed, his gaze instantly became deep and unfathomable. This star tablet was a treasure of the Dharma assembly. Every time the sects competed, it would be kept by the owner. This time, it was the Taihao school's turn to be the owner, so it was placed at the foot of Duguang Mountain. However, since the hall master of the Qingsang School Duzhen Hall wanted to view it, naturally, no one would stop him for such a small matter. He gave the order, and in less than 3 days, someone brought it over. The sex records said that this tablet was originally a record of the changes in the sky. 6 of them had already been deduced. Zhang Yan didn't think that the contents inside were that simple. Back then, when he studied the tablet, he felt that his senses had greatly increased and he had also gained some benefits. Now, in order to comprehend the changes in heaven and earth, he had to take a good look. He stood where he was and patiently deduced in his heart. However, after looking at the first 6 stone tablets, he didn't see anything unusual. As for the trajectory of the stars, since the battle between the ancient Vedanta and the sky demon, the central pillar had collapsed and broken. Since then, it was difficult to see the stars. Even Yuanying cultivators couldn't go beyond the 9 heavens. Only Taoist Dong Tian could see the true appearance, so it was difficult to determine if there was a mistake. Finally, he cast his gaze on the remaining 3 unknown stone tablets. After a closer look, he found that with his attainments in the Tao of Erosion runes, it was also extremely difficult to decipher. If not for the broken jade, who knew how long it would take to decipher it out of thin air? Decades or even centuries would be a good estimate. He shook his head. It was no wonder that this stele had been here for nearly 10,000 years. No one was interested. The junior disciples of the sect. How could he have the ability to read the inscriptions on the tablet? As for those who had the ability to comprehend this monument, most of them had inherited their own cultivation methods and knew which path to take. Even if another top-tier secret technique was placed in front of him, he would at most learn about it. He would not study it in depth. Of course, it was impossible for him to spend a large amount of time on this strange star monument. He was the only one who was different. His magic power cultivation was becoming more and more perfect, and now he was investigating the mysteries of heaven and earth. As long as it involved the erosion runes, he naturally had to carefully investigate them. Although these erosion inscriptions seemed to be a lot, they were just a drop in the ocean in ancient times. If we want to trace the origin, we still have a long way to go. It seems that we must go to the 3 western continents. Suddenly, he remembered that Yin Zhaokong had given him an etched text jade slip. He took it out of his pouch and circulated his Fa Li. He couldn't help but be surprised. If he wasn't mistaken, the content of the jade slip was not some kind of explanation. It was a cultivation method called mortal external body. He didn't care much about it. What really caught his attention was the inscriptions on the jade slip. Although there were only a few hundred words, the profoundness were not much less than the 3 star steles. There was no clear record of who passed down the star steles, but he thought that it was related to the great underworld patriarch. This jade slip belonged to the Crossing Dust sect master Yin Zhaokong. Looking at the solemn expression on his face when he took it out, it must be related to a few powerhouses from 10,000 years ago. As he was looking at it carefully, he heard Xin Nu say with a clear bell-like voice, "Master, Temple Master Hua of the Daylight Temple has come to visit." Zhang Yan was surprised. After Hu Xian entered the Daylight Temple, he was rumored to be in seclusion and rarely saw anyone. He must have come for something, so he said, "Invite Temple Master Hua to the front hall and tell him that I will be there shortly." Xin Nu said yes and went to make arrangements. Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and put away all the stone steles and jade slips in the hall. Then he came out of the pavilion, opened the array door and went down the mountain. Not long after, he arrived at the front of the mountain to welcome Hu Xian. Hu Xian saw him coming and stood up from his seat. He raised his hand and greeted, "Junior brother Zhang, long time no see." Zhang Yan looked at him and saw that he was wearing a robe with sunglow patterns and a crown. His eyes were full of spirit and there was hidden lightning running through them. There were no clouds above his head. Standing there, he gave the feeling that he was one with heaven and earth. It was obvious that he had cultivated the Yuanying Dharma body. Zhang Yan raised his hand and greeted, "Senior brother Hua's cultivation has improved greatly. It's time to congratulate you. When is the banquet?" Hua Xian waved his hand and said, "It's just a small ceremony. It's best not to." With his status, after he entered the third-degree realm, he would mostly invite his fellow disciples to congratulate him. The various islands and mansions would also send congratulatory gifts. However, he was after all the son-in-law of the Qin clan. Because he didn't want to publicize his status, he didn't do anything. Zhang Yan could guess the reason, but he was just being polite. Seeing that Hua Xian avoided it, he smiled and didn't mention it again. He invited him to the Osmanthus pavilion in the mountain to drink. Here, the garden was golden and fragrant. The stream in the forest was connected to the lake outside the mountain. There were spiritual fish and red-crowned cranes carrying cups of wine. Everything was delicious. Shen Nu, on the other hand, called over a dozen Jing people over to pour wine and water at the side. After drinking to his heart's content, Hua Xian looked at the surroundings and sighed with emotion. When I entered earlier, I noticed that the hall was completely empty, and there were very few people around. It's similar to my daylight hall. I heard that a few thousand years ago, all the people within the 3 halls and the various islands were reciting scriptures and comprehending the profound, fishing and rowing boats. They were extremely carefree, but I wonder what sort of scene it was. Zhang Yan knew that he was talking about the era of the previous sect master, Qin Qingang. At that time, Qinsung school was at its peak, so naturally there were thousands of scenes. However, several hundred years ago, the sect had experienced internal strife. Although the sect had seen some improvement under the painstaking management of the current sect master, Qin Mabai, they had still consumed a lot of vitality. Fortunately, the Azure Sea sect had a profound and deep foundation that could not be easily shaken. If an ordinary sect had come, they would have long been destroyed by internal and external troubles. Both of their cultivations were similar and they both had the intention to peek into the cave. Unknowingly, they started talking about how to succeed. Zhang Yan drank a cup of wine and asked, "Has senior martial brother Hua found a way?" Hua Xian's tone was firm. "After I entered Daylight Hall, I read many of the books left behind by the seniors. I learned a lot and decided on the path of Tao." Zhang Yan was enlightened. There were predecessors in the Duzhen Palace who left behind the heavenly cave technique. Presumably, there was no lack of such opportunities in the Daylight Palace. However, there was no way to follow for the path of Tao, so he had to find it himself slowly. Hua Xian looked at him and said, "Junior apprentice brother, have you noticed that the spiritual vigor in the floating heavenly palace is much more restrained than before?" Zhang Yan nodded, "I did feel that way." Hua Xian said, "I've asked the seniors in the school. This is caused by the breathing of spiritual vigor before a cultivator achieves the cave." After a pause, he looked over and said seriously, "I'm afraid senior apprentice brother Qi won't need more than 100 years to be able to sit in the hall. Junior apprentice brother, wait patiently. There will be a chance." Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. He thought for a while and said, "Senior apprentice brother Hua didn't talk about the main topic but pretended to be nice to me first. I think the things that will happen later are very likely to be hindered by me." After they talked for a long time, Hua Xian gradually revealed the purpose of his visit. "I'm here because Qin wants to borrow Jun Yang's Qi of Essence from the school. I wonder if this is hindering junior apprentice brother. So I'm here to ask junior apprentice brother." Zhang Yan thought for a while. Among the aristocratic families, Hua Xian was the only one who could enter the cave, so he asked, "Does senior apprentice brother need it?" Hua Xian shook his head and said, "Not me, but Ding Yang's Zhou." Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and said, "Senior apprentice brother Hua, can you tell me the inside story in detail?" Hua Xian didn't conceal anything and explained the cause and effect of the matter. In the end, he said seriously, "This time, I didn't want to lose face, so I came to junior brother Zhang's place to persuade you. However, if junior brother feels that it's inappropriate, I can go back and stop this matter." Zhang Yan thought for a while and smiled. He said, "Dingyang's Qin is under Qinsung. If they need Jun Yang's Qi of Essence, I won't say much. But if they want to borrow Jun Yang's Qi of Essence, they need to give an explanation to the school. Hu Xian's expression became serious and he asked, then in junior apprentice brother's opinion, what should we do? Zhang Yan smiled and said, if you want to borrow it, it's simple. You need to bring some good things to comfort your fellow disciples. Chen's Qi of Essence was borrowed to exchange for 2 Heaven's 100 reincarnation stones from Zhou's so they could refine them into supreme treasures. But to put it bluntly, it was a private matter. Once the Qi of Essence was borrowed, the school would obviously owe them something, so they needed to take out some things as compensation. In short, they needed to pay some price to appease the disciples who were qualified to enjoy Jun Yang's Qi of Essence. Hu Xian thought for a while and immediately understood what he meant. He also smiled and said in agreement, Junior Apprentice Brother's words are the most reasonable. After I go back, I'll tell them. Once this suggestion was made, if Chen wanted to do this, they had to take out a lot of good things. Otherwise, they would offend many of their fellow disciples. In his opinion, Chen was most likely unwilling to suffer this loss, so this matter would fall on Zhou in the end. If Zhou retreated in the face of difficulties, that would be the best. If she persisted, then Qinsang's school would not suffer a loss, and everyone would benefit. He originally thought that this matter would be extremely difficult to deal with. If he wasn't careful, he might even become enemies with Zhang Yan. He didn't expect this matter to be resolved so easily. His expression instantly became much more relaxed. He took out an invitation from his sleeve and said, I almost forgot something. Junior Apprentice Brother Fang knows I'm here and asked me to pass this to Junior Apprentice Brother. Zhang Yan took it and saw that it was Fang Zhenlu's yuanying. Chen had set up a banquet and specially invited him to attend. After Fang Zhenlu was stripped of his position by Chen, he didn't receive the slightest bit of support from the school, so he became more and more depressed. He didn't have the heart to cultivate and had long since been abandoned by his peers. However, he was once one of the top 10 disciples after all, so his foundation was still there. In the end, he still stepped into the yuanying realm. Zhang Yan put away the invitation and said, in a few days, I need to travel far away, so I won't be in the school at that time. I'll naturally send a disciple to attend the banquet on my behalf. Chapter 889. Website, please inform each other to recommend it to your QQ group, Weibo/WeChat forum, and post bar. After Zhang Yan sent Hu Xian away, he spent the next few days cultivating in the cave abode. When he was free, he would deduce the Dharmakaya technique. With the help of the broken jade, it only took him half a month to decipher the entire technique. After studying it, he found that this Dharmakaya technique was quite strange. This cultivation technique couldn't be used in a battle of magical powers. In ancient times, when cultivators cultivated the Kung Fu, in order to comprehend the state of mind, they would create an avatar that had its memories and magic power taken away. This avatar would then go to the mortal world to temper itself. This technique wasn't difficult. After going through it in his mind a few times, he had already understood it. However, there was a bottleneck. When a cultivator created a clone, they had to cut off a part of their own body as a medium. Because of the cultivation method, it was impossible to reconnect the body. Even if they obtained some precious pills or spirit medicines in the future, they would not be able to grow back. At first, Zhang Yan thought that it was created by a cultivator who cultivated the path of strength. Only such a person wouldn't be afraid of having their body damaged. However, after studying it, he was surprised to find that even a cultivator who cultivated the path of strength would also end up like this. He couldn't help but shake his head. This technique alone was enough to make people stop. After all, other than those who went beyond the mortal world, even people like those from the heavenly abode wouldn't allow their bodies to be damaged before they ascended. If this was a powerful technique, it would be fine. There were many people in the world who would pay a price for such power. However, this technique was obscure and didn't look like a good technique. No one would be willing to do it. Seeing this, he was about to put it aside. However, he suddenly remembered another technique. If he used it, he wouldn't have to worry about it. He thought for a while and thought to himself, maybe I can give it a try. He did what he thought. His Dharmakaya suddenly dispersed like a cloud of smoke and returned to the body hidden in the soul-sealing essence hut. Then, he used the technique. He looked inside himself. After a while, he found a drop of black blood in his body. It was like a drop of ink seeping into clear water. It was very eye-catching. His eyes flashed as he muttered, compared to the last time, it has increased a little. Ever since he reached the great perfection of the divine contract. Then, he sensed a divine ability in his mind. He practiced according to the method. It condensed into this drop of blood. He had secretly tested it with the remnant jade. If he could turn all the blood in his body into this black color, he would be able to catalyze his magic power. One could only vaguely see that it seemed to have 8 arms and 3 heads. Its horns and fangs were protruding, making it look extremely ferocious. He felt that this didn't conform to his cultivation path, and he wasn't in a hurry, so he didn't continue cultivating. However, this drop of profound blood remained within his body, and during this period of time, it didn't dissipate because he stopped cultivating, and it had instead strengthened slightly. After thinking for a while, he withdrew his consciousness and activated his cultivation method. With a series of crackling sounds, the blood essence gradually disappeared, and a muscular arm covered in thick black scales slowly stretched out from his back. He didn't even look at it. With a thought, a beam of sword light flew out and cut it in half. With a clatter, the severed arm fell to the ground. It struggled there, and the bricks on the ground were grabbed by its fingers. Like rotten soil, a hole was dug out. After a long time, a wisp of black gas gradually dissipated from the severed arm. The black scales were gone, and it returned to its original color. It was no longer as inhuman as it was just now. Zhang Yan's gaze fell on it, and he thought to himself, my previous guess was right. This blood is in my body, and now that it has left, it has become water without a source. However, this cultivation method of the Crossing Earth sect has the effect of severing life force, or else it would be difficult to sever it. Looks like before I understand the details of this cultivation method, I can't further cultivate this divine ability. He pointed at the severed arm, and the essence energy on it exploded before slowly condensing. In an instant, it turned into a physical body that was exactly like him. He took a few glances and found that although the chi and blood of this incarnation were like that of a mortal, its expression was dull and lifeless. According to the cultivation method, he still needed to split a strand of his soul before he could go to the mortal world to train. However, at this point, he had already understood the changes in the cultivation method, and there was no need to try again. At this moment, a thought suddenly appeared in his mind, these two cultivation methods are quite compatible. As long as I am willing to use my strength and not be stingy with my soul, it won't be difficult to make dozens or hundreds of incarnations. Thinking about this, he couldn't help but laugh. He flicked his hand and threw out a human bag. With a roll of his sleeve, he put it in. After finishing this, he once again entered into a meditative state and moved his chi. Because he had already decided to travel outside, and the distance to the west continent was no less than when he went to Dongsheng, he needed to inform Zhou Chengju first. On the second day, he left the Crossing Truth Hall and went to Dan Ding Courtyard. After Elder Wu left, Zhou Chengju had already come out. Seeing him, he was quite happy and invited him to sit in the fish restaurant. Hearing that he wanted to go west, his expression turned serious and said, the 3 west continents can't be compared to the 4 continents of Donghua. Since the changes in the ancient times, it isn't a place for us cultivators to stay for long. Junior apprentice brother, please be careful when you go. Zhang Yan asked, from what senior apprentice brother said, you seem to know the details of the west continent. For this trip, he had looked up many ancient books. Although there were many books in Jinluo Courtyard, there were very few records about the west continent. Zhou Chengju said, I only know a little. My mother's family was originally from the west continent, and they left behind a few travel books. I read them when I was young, and I still remember them. I can tell junior apprentice brother later, but things have changed with the passage of time. I can only refer to what they said. Zhang Yan nodded. Nowadays, among the sects in Donghua continent, except for a few sects that were established by cultivators from beyond the heavens, almost all of them moved from the west continent. Zhou Chengju's mother's family must be one of them. Zhou Chengju asked again, this time, what kind of instrument will you be using? Zhang Yan said, this time, I will be flying across the sea alone, and I want to travel on the twin dragons. Zhou Chengju said seriously, that's good. The west continent is not like other places. I would rather travel slowly than go to the extreme sky. Zhang Yan smiled and said, is it because of the golden moon bug? Zhou Chengju said solemnly, junior apprentice brother, don't look down on this bug. Even the people from the heavenly grotto heaven don't want to provoke it, so it's better not to provoke it. Zhang Yan nodded slowly. Land of the 9 continents. If the giant beasts and strange fish in the North Sea were not counted, then the West Sea would be the most dangerous place. And the reason was the golden moon worm. The bug was only the size of a speck of dust, and there were billions of them in the extreme sky astral current. Usually, they moved in clouds, and they lived by eating the astral heroes. If they came together, not to mention the cultivator's physical body, it would be the Yuanying Dharma body. They could also be injured. Only the heavenly grotto heaven cultivators were not afraid. If the bug only lingered in the sky, there was nothing to fear. However, whenever the weather changed, the moonlight would penetrate the clouds. It would follow the light and escape. It would land on the surface. Occasionally, there would be lightning that would break the clouds. It would also scatter down, and it loved to go to places with abundant spiritual energy. If cultivators didn't notice, they would fall into it unknowingly. Fortunately, it seemed to be bound by something and never came to the East continent, or else it would be a huge disaster. After Zhou Chengju gave a few more reminders, he told him everything he knew about the West continent. Zhang Yan sat in the fish tower for half a day, memorizing all the important points, and then he left. When he was in the sky, he seemed to have thought of something, and he turned around and said, this search will take a long time, and I don't know when I will return. Senior apprentice brother, please take care. Zhou Chengju stroked his beard and smiled, I will. Junior apprentice brother, don't worry and don't worry. Zhang Yan leaped up and left with the wind. When he was about to leave the Danding courtyard, he looked back and saw that Zhou Chengju was still standing on the fish tower. He paused for a moment, then activated his mana and flew out of the courtyard. He flew all the way, and soon he left the dragon lake. He identified the direction, turned into a golden rainbow, and went straight to the clear nether heavenly lake. After entering the cave abode, he summoned the mirror spirit and all the disciples, and then he took care of them one by one. After 5 days, he came out of the cave abode, and when he reached the peak, he looked at the disciples and said, you don't have to send me off, go back. Lu Yeni gracefully bowed down and said, disciple respectfully sends benevolent teacher off, and prays that benevolent teacher will soon succeed and return to the mountain. Behind her, Tian Kuan, Wei Zihong, the Wang sisters and the others also knelt down. Zhang Yan nodded and smiled. He shook his sleeves, and there was a whistling sound of a sword. A beam of light flew into the sky. Pengyuan sect, Boju Pavilion. Jiang Zhen was cultivating in the cave abode, and today, he felt it was going smoothly. Suddenly, he felt a strange vibration in his sleeves, and he was startled. He took it out and saw that it was the talisman given by the sect, and it was glowing faintly. He thought, I wonder which fellow disciple came here. Could it be junior brother Wei? He put away the talisman and walked out, but he was also cautious. When he was outside the mountain gate, he took out the talisman again, and the spiritual light shone on his eyebrows, and there were talisman markings on it. He knew that it couldn't be faked, so he followed the direction of the aura. After walking for more than 10 miles, he arrived at a small mountain. He saw a young Taoist standing at the peak of the mountain, smiling at him. Jiang Zheng's body trembled, and he couldn't keep calm anymore. He quickly landed and kowtowed, saying, I didn't expect master to come personally, disciple was impolite and didn't welcome you. Zhang Yan took a step forward, and lifted him up with his sleeves, saying, "Disciple doesn't need to stand on ceremony." Jiang Zheng said, "Disciple invites master to take a seat on the mountain, disciple and wife can serve tea." Zhang Yan smiled, "Master is going out to travel, and before I leave, I want to visit a few old friends. I just happened to pass by here, and I have a few words to say. I'll leave after that." Jiang Zheng solemnly bowed, saying, "If master has any instructions, just tell me." Zhang Yan nodded, "I don't know when I'll be back. When I'm not around, your eldest senior sister will be in charge of the cave abode. If you have any difficulties, you can look for her." Jiang Zheng said, "Disciple will remember." Zhang Yan patted his shoulder, saying, "Among my disciples, in terms of talent, you can't compare to your peers, but in terms of the firmness of your Tao heart, you don't fall behind anyone. I hope that when I return, you'll have achieved something." Jiang Zheng's expression was firm, and he said seriously, "Disciple won't dare to disappoint master." Zhang Yan nodded slightly, and he took out a jade scroll from his sleeves, saying gently, "This isn't a divine art, just some of master's daily experience and comprehension. You can take a look at it." Jiang Zheng took a deep breath, and he walked forward, raising his hands to receive it solemnly. Zhang Yan smiled, saying, "I'll leave now, disciple, take care of yourself." Jiang Zheng hurriedly knelt down to send him off, and when he raised his head again, he saw that in the vast night sky, a sword rainbow was already heading west. Chapter 890. After Zhang Yan left the Pengyuan sect, he headed west. After the battle at the Devil's Cave, the 6 great demon sects did not make any big moves. The situation in Donghua was relatively quiet. Coupled with his reputation, no one dared to provoke him. Therefore, the journey was smooth. After a few days, he arrived at the Sui River. On the other side of this torrential river was the central pillar continent, which was vast and seemed to want to reach the sky. Zhang Yan flew in the air and stood by the river with his sleeves behind his back. He looked at the vast world and the endless river. Suddenly, he felt relieved. However, that person was still entrenched in the central continent. When he retrieved the treasure scroll to enter the realm, he was sensed by that person. Although he was not afraid of that person with his current identity, it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. If that person did not come to find him, there was no need for him to go to him. Thinking of this, he did not continue to move forward. Instead, he decided to turn north, go around the central continent, and then enter the West Sea. He stepped on the ground and a cloud surrounded his body. His sleeves fluttered and he flew up. Not long after, he broke through the cloud and leaped into the sky. Then, he used the strong wind to fly quickly. After traveling like this for 7 or 8 days, a boundless ocean appeared in front of them. When he reached here, he waved his sleeves. A ray of spiritual light flew out from his sleeves and turned into a cloud. After 2 dragon roars, a pair of long-bearded black flood dragons came out. They were fully equipped and behind them was a large pagoda. The West Sea was chaotic. Even if he was a Yuanian cultivator, he did not dare to underestimate walking on the sea. He had to maintain his mana at all times. With the flood dragon carriage, he could save a lot of energy. Along with the flood dragon chariot, there was also a strange insect that was as clear as colored glass and had a line of blood on its back. When it landed, it transformed into a young man with a pale complexion. He came forward and bowed, "Greetings, master." Zhang Yan said, "In front, I will enter the pagoda to cultivate. Zhang Chan, you take care of the carriage." Among the children beside him, only Jing Yu was the most convenient to use. However, because he was familiar with the big and small matters in the sect, he left him in the cave residence. Even if the disciples in the sect were to encounter any unforeseen circumstances, with him at the side, he could come up with an idea. Therefore, he only brought along Zhang Chan on this trip. Zhang Chan patted his chest and said, "Don't worry, master. As long as it's not those 1,000-year-old monsters with profound cultivation, I can deal with them." At this moment, one of the flood dragons could not help but say, "Spiritual master, crossing the sea and passing through the clouds is just a piece of cake for the two brothers. They can be safe even without this little demon." The other one also lazily echoed, "Elder brother is right. This little demon doesn't seem to be very big. How much cultivation can he have?" When Zhang Chan saw that he was being looked down upon, he immediately jumped up and rolled up his sleeves. He angrily said, "You two long worms, if you don't accept this, then I'll give you a chance. Why don't you come and spar with me?" The black flood dragon laughed and said, "You little worm have a big temper. My brother doesn't mind playing with you, but who should be responsible for delaying your journey?" This double flood dragon carriage could only be ridden by the 10 disciples of the Qinsang school or those who used to be disciples. Whenever they went out, it was a solemn occasion. The two black flood dragons never dared to be rash. This trip could be considered to be an escape from the cage. They felt free and immediately showed their true nature. Zhang Chan was not good at talking. How could he fight against the two of them? He was so angry that he shouted. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. He glanced around. Whether it was Zhang Chan or the two flood dragons, they felt a chill when he looked at them. Suddenly, their bodies trembled and they all stopped talking. Zhang Yan no longer paid attention to them. He waved his sleeves and entered the tower. He sat down cross-legged and entered a meditative state in a moment. After traveling like this for 4 days, Jingyu said outside, "Master, there is a big island in front. There seems to be a lot of cultivators." Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. It had only been a few days since he saw the Zhongzhou continent, but at least half of the continent was already there. It was so far away that it could be considered the outer sea of the West Sea. There were cultivators in this place, which was somewhat different from what he knew before. He waved his hand and opened the restriction of the curtain door in front of him. He looked down and saw a long island lying on the sea. There were a few high peaks, trees, and fog. He could see that there was a defensive formation on the island, but it was very rough and complicated. Outside, there were many cultivators riding on birds and boats, going in and out. There were also groups of 5, patrolling around. They looked like they were facing a great enemy. When the flood dragon carriage came, it attracted the attention of a group of people patrolling below. After a few words of discussion, they pushed out a beautiful female cultivator in a light yellow feather coat. When the woman came in front of the flood dragon carriage, she looked at the 2 fierce black flood dragons with fear. She bowed and said timidly, "Senior, are you here to help my Xiandi island?" Zhang Yan said lightly, "I just passed by this place." When the woman heard that, she was stunned. She was at a loss for words and did not know what to say. At this time, an old voice behind her said, "Back off." The woman looked back and saw a man from Daoren coming up. He called, "Master," and quickly backed off. Daoren came to the front. He first looked at the flood dragon carriage, then at Zhang Yan. He was a little surprised. He bowed and said, "Fellow cultivator, I'm Wang Nanshao, the person in charge of this place. I heard that you passed by this place, but the road ahead is not safe. I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to pass by. If you don't mind, why don't you come to the island and let me play host?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Sure." Wang Nanshao quickly moved aside and said, "Please." The two of them went to the island together. Seeing the two of them leaving, the cultivators in the air gathered together. A young cultivator said enviously, "This senior came here on a flood dragon. He must be an elder of a big sect in the province." A short and stout Taoist shook his head and said, "I don't think so. He might be the leader of some sect." Senior Martial Brother Lu of Zhenluo League said that his master caught a heavenly crane that had been cultivating for several years as his mount. But compared to this Taoist, it's nothing. When the woman called saw that there were no outsiders, she became bolder and said, "Senior Martial Brothers, in your opinion, who is stronger between this Taoist and that big demon?" The young cultivator said, "That demon is so powerful. Even our master is not a match for it." This Taoist might not be a match for it. The short and stout Taoist shook his head and said, otherwise, with the help of the 2 flood dragons, he might not lose to that demon. The 2 of them had their own opinions. For a while, neither of them was convinced, so they started arguing. On the highest peak of the island, there was a magnificent temple that took up the entire peak. The stone steps in front of the temple were like a snake's path. There were many strange flowers and rare plants planted around the temple. Wang Nanshao politely invited Zhang Yan into the monastery and served him some good tea. She also tried to inquire about his background. When she heard that he was from the Donghua continent, she was astonished and her attitude became even more respectful. Zhang Yan also learned from the conversation that the Xiandi Island sect was attacked by the Shaoqing sect in Donghua continent a few years ago. However, the West Ocean was not full of spiritual opportunity. Therefore, in addition to daily cultivation, they also needed to collect fish pearls from the sea and exchange them with the big sects in Donghua continent for some spiritual medicine and precious pills. As Wang Nanshao spoke, she took out a jade box from her sleeve and placed it on the table. She pointed at it and said, "This is the Songhua fish pearl." Zhang Yan looked at the jade box and saw that it was full of shiny jade pearls. They were similar to shell pearls, but they were brighter and had a clear spiritual aura lingering on them. Wang Nanshao said, "Fellow Taoist, don't underestimate these fish pearls. They are good materials for refining pills and weapons. Even the flying swords of Shaoqing sect use them as spiritual medicine. All the sects in Donghua continent are willing to pay a high price for them. These pearls are the best of the best." Speaking of this, he looked at Zhang Yan and smiled while stroking his beard. "Although this is the first time I met you, I feel that we hit it off very well. I'll give you this box, friend." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Fellow Taoist, if you have something to say, just say it." Wang Daoren sighed. He knew that he had overstepped his boundaries. He was also helpless. If he wasn't forced to the point of no choice, he wouldn't have acted like this. He could only smile bitterly and tell the reason. It turned out that they were hiding in this place to cultivate. Although their spiritual vigor was weak, they were able to avoid the troubles in Donghua continent. However, a few years ago, a demon came and claimed that this place was his training ground. He ordered all the cultivators to leave this place within a month. Otherwise, he would be ruthless. Wang Nanshao didn't want to sit still and wait for death. He fought with the demon but was defeated. He barely escaped with his life. After he came back, he invited his friends to come and help him. He was ready to fight with the demon and decide the ownership of this place. Half a month had passed. Although many people came, only one person had stepped into the Yuanying realm. Wang Nanshao knew how powerful the demon was and was having a headache. When he saw Zhang Yan, he was like a drowning person who found a life-saving thing. He hoped that he could persuade him to come and help. Zhang Yan listened to him and raised his eyebrows. There was suddenly a powerful demon in the West Sea. Judging by his means, he was not an ordinary person. It didn't make sense. He first suspected that the Devil's Doctrine's cultivators were behind this. After thinking for a while, he said, "I don't want a demon to show off here. As a fellow cultivator, I can help, but on one condition." Wang Nanshao was overjoyed. As a fellow Yuanying cultivator, he could see that Meng Qi's gang cloud had disappeared. He was obviously a Dharmakaya who had reached the Nirvana realm. With such a cultivation, if he was willing to help, he could save the lives of everyone on the island. He immediately stood up and bowed. "What do you want?" "Just tell me. Daoren will agree." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I don't need anything else. I just want a painting of traveling across the sea. Are you willing to give it to me?" "A painting of traveling across the sea?" Old Taoist Wang hesitated for a moment. Most of the sects that cultivated on the mortal sea had maps of crossing the sea with them. These maps recorded the direction of the water current, the distribution of the islands, the changes in the weather, the strange treasures of the sea, and many other secrets. If such a secret book was spread, it would be enough to make a sect prosperous. As for the map of the Xiandi Island, it took the people of the sect several years to complete it. He was also reluctant to hand it over just like that. But on second thought, if the demon came here in half a month, even his sect would be taken away. What was the use of keeping the painting? Thinking of this, he made up his mind and slammed the table. Okay, Daoren will give it to you. P.S. Chapter 891. Zhang Yan was sitting cross-legged in the guest pavilion of the Hanging Flute Island. There was an unfurled scroll floating in front of him. The scroll was about 7 feet wide. Spiritual qi was drifting around the scroll, and it was constantly emitting light. He raised his hand and gently brushed it away. It was as if a layer of gauze had been lifted, revealing the true appearance of the room. At this moment, it could be clearly seen that the Hanging Flute Island was in the center of the picture. The surrounding 100 miles were not empty, but there were many iron rocks and strange stones scattered in the sea. At a rough glance, there were more than 1,000 of them. Looking outside, one could see a spiritual wind revolving around it. Although there was only a weak qi flow on the picture, it was like a monstrous storm outside. The further one went, the faster the surging became. However, it seemed to be deliberately avoiding this part of the sea. The 100 miles of land was completely calm. There was no great formation guarding this place, nor was there any expert overseeing it. The reason for such a strange appearance was quite thought-provoking. When Zhang Yan came here, he asked Wang Nanshao about it, but the latter was already used to it. He only said that when his master came here with his disciples, it was like this. He guessed that this place might be a corner of the ancient continent. Now that it was submerged by the sea, it was still protected by the earth and qi. Zhang Yan knew that this was not the case. From ancient times until now, the earth and qi of the 9 continents had already been absorbed by cultivators. Unless one dug deep into the earth, it would be difficult to find it. In this world, there were not many cultivators with such ability, so it was only a wild guess. In ancient times, the cultivators fought with the demons, causing the central pillar to collapse. Many of the broken pillars were scattered in the sky. The fragments were purified by the heavenly extreme astral wind and the spiritual light of the sun and moon, turning into strong astral stones. The rest fell to the ground. The Hanging Flute Island was most likely one of the broken pillars and fell into the sea. The central pillar continent was connected to the sky and the earth. It was a gathering of the spirits of the 9 continents. If it wasn't near the 3 eastern continents, the demons and ferocious beasts of the 3 continents would have regarded it as a forbidden land. It had long been occupied by cultivators. Later, it cracked and collapsed, and the beautiful scenery was gone forever. Even so, the number of spiritual objects in the central pillar continent was greater than that of the 3 continents. If that was the case, then it would explain why there was such a blessed place far away from the continent. He took out the fish pearls from the box and pinched one with 2 fingers. He gently rubbed it and it turned into powder. After a moment of observation, he did not discover anything. After thinking for a moment, he raised his hand and wiped the box. The entire box of jade beads instantly turned into fine powder. At this moment, when he sensed it again, his eyes couldn't help but flash. It was clearly bred from the belly of a spiritual fish in the sea, but it contained a trace of indistinguishable yang qi. In that case, if what he was standing on was really the remnant of the central pillar, then it was very likely to be the section outside of the extreme heaven. Otherwise, it would be impossible for this qi to remain. His thoughts turned. He decided to go there personally to take a look. Thus, he stood up and walked out of the monastery before floating into the sky. He left the island and headed for the sea. Ever since Zhang Yan entered the island, everyone had been paying attention to his every move. As soon as he went out to sea, someone immediately reported it to Wang Nanshao. Because this person was afraid of Zhang Yan's cultivation, he didn't dare to ask for the contract. Thus, he was extremely worried that Zhang Yan wouldn't return, so he said, "If Daoist Zhang returns, immediately inform me." Zhang Yan followed the direction of the map. After traveling for tens of miles, he came to a wide reef. This reef was hundreds of feet wide. It was completely black and had long been polished by the waves. Looking from above, it looked like the back of a giant beast floating on the surface of the sea. He circled above, and seeing that he couldn't see anything strange, he descended and used the water escape technique to dive deep into the sea. In one breath, he sank 10,000 feet. Just now, he reached the bottom of the sea. Just now, when he looked again, the reef was clearly a large rock in the sea. The top and bottom were one, and the part that protruded out of the sea was only a slight edge. The part of the rock hidden under the sea was full of potholes, full of cracks and holes, like a beehive, and there were many strange fish with flowing lights coming in and out. This fish looked strange. There was a crown on its head, like a cluster of bright red coral, but its body was transparent like glass, and its internal organs could be seen clearly. At the end of the tail, there was a glittering crystal bead, full and smooth, bright and clean. Zhang Yan took a few glances and knew that this was the Songhua fish that Wang Nanxiao mentioned. However, the ones in front of him were even bigger, at least 4 feet long. Looking around, there were probably tens of thousands of them. At this moment, they were gathered together, and under the reflection of the mountain walls, there were colorful waves everywhere. This school of fish was obviously not caught by people, and they swam around him without a sense of fear. He was not interested in this fish, and flew into a larger cave. After a few miles, stone pillars that were emitting colorful lights appeared in front of him. He stopped, stretched out his finger and pointed lightly, and the stone pillar instantly shattered, turning into countless fine sand. He grabbed a handful, and sure enough, he felt the same strong yang qi in it, but it was very weak, and if he did not look carefully, he would miss it. It should be known that the central pillar continent was the most unique among the 9 continents. It had been bathed in the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth for a long time, and even if it was damaged, the spiritual essence it contained was extraordinary. Since that was the case, if the demon knew the inside story, it was not surprising that he wanted to take it for himself. Zhang Yan calculated in his heart, collecting the spiritual essence here was much easier than going to the extreme sky to capture the Junyang spiritual essence, and the yang poison contained in it had mostly dissipated in the past tens of thousands of years. Because this place was just a random choice, he did not rule out the possibility that there was a better place here, so he did not start immediately, but flew out and circled around the outside. After doing so, he discovered that it was not just 100 miles, but thousands of miles away. It was all broken mountains, but most of the spiritual essence had been exhausted, and there were no spiritual fish living in it. He thought for a while, and nodded subconsciously. These broken stones of the central pillar had been here for at least tens of thousands of years, and if he could find it, those cultivators who came from the east from the west continent would not have missed it. They must have been taken away by the demon, and what was left now was only a very small part. However, since he came here, he did not want to return empty-handed, so he took out a porcelain bottle, used his mana, and collected the spiritual essence. He was not greedy, and after a few hours, when the bottle was full, he put it away, and used his escape method to return to the sea, back to his original residence. When Wang Nanxiao knew that he was back, she heaved a sigh of relief, and ordered people to send a lot of good things. Since Zhang Yan had taken the sea chart, he naturally wouldn't just leave like that. He took everything, and this action allowed Wang Nanxiao to completely relax. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye, and in the blink of an eye, the time limit set by the demon had arrived. On this day, a strong wind suddenly blew on the sea, and dark clouds covered the sky. Countless large waves surged, and thousands of strange sea monsters emerged from the waves. They were all barebacked and barefooted, and they held spears in their hands as they stood on the waves. At this time, there was the sound of a drum, and hundreds of fish-headed monsters with bulging muscles worked together to pull out a giant shell that was 30 meters in size from the sea. The shell's petals were wide open, revealing its soft abdomen. There was a bed inside, and a fair-skinned and handsome young cultivator was sitting on it. His hair was tied up, and his eyebrows were trimmed. There was a hint of arrogance in his eyes, and he seemed to be insufferably arrogant. He glanced at the hanging flute island in high spirits, raised his hand, and said, "Who will go on my behalf and ask Daoren whether he will fight or surrender?" As soon as he said this, several fish monsters covered in scales immediately stood up, and they all volunteered to go to the island. However, none of them were willing to fall behind, and soon, they began to push and shove each other. The young cultivator looked at the noisy crowd below, and he revealed a satisfied expression. He picked up a basket of jade beads beside him, and casually threw it at the feet of a fish monster. He pointed at it and said, "I'll choose you. Go and come back quickly." The fish monster revealed an expression of joy, and it grabbed the bead, then turned around and dove into the water. The young cultivator waved his hand, and two enchanting female monsters with half their clothes on came up to massage his legs and back. Just as they were enjoying themselves, an object suddenly flew over from afar, and it landed at their feet with a thud, rolling a few times before coming to a stop. He lowered his head and saw that it was the head of the fish monster. He couldn't help but curse inwardly, and he kicked it away. He then looked at the island in front of him with a sneer, and said, "I originally wanted to let you live, but since you don't know what's good for you, I'll deal with you." He pushed the two female monsters away, and he leaped into the air. He took out a small flag from his bosom and lightly waved it a few times. A moment later, the waves surged up violently, and for a moment, they actually rose to a height of several dozen meters. He pointed forward again, and the waves surged towards the hanging flute island. At this moment, Zhang Yan had been invited to a pagoda at the highest point of the island. Apart from the owner of this place, Wang Nanshao, he was accompanied by a fellow Taoist who had rushed over to help earlier. This person was surnamed Lu, and he was from the Zhenluo Union of the Middle Pillar region. His cultivation was only at the first layer of the Yuanying realm. He seemed to have heard of Zhang Yan's name, and when he learned of it, his gaze always contained a hint of fear. At this moment, Wang Nanshao saw the waves approaching, and he said to Taoist Lu, "Let's first exhaust that demon's magic power. When its strength is exhausted, Taoist Lu and I will deal with it together." Taoist Lu naturally agreed. Wang Nanshao then turned to Zhang Yan, and he cupped his hands and said, "That demon is extremely powerful. If we can't defeat it, I'll have to ask for Taoist Lu's help." Previously, he couldn't defeat this demon because he was a sect master, and he had too many things to worry about. He had some misgivings, and it was difficult for him to display his full strength. But now, with a third-layer cultivator by his side, and with the help of a fellow Taoist, he agreed that he could fight with all his might. Zhang Yan smiled, and said, "Since I have already promised Taoist Lu, I will naturally help out later." Wang Nanshao repeatedly agreed. He originally thought that the defensive formation on the island would be able to resist for a while, but to his surprise, the ground beneath his feet started to shake, and after a while, the entire island also started to tremble lightly. He couldn't help but change his expression, and he asked in surprise, "Where did that demon get that magic treasure? Why is it so powerful?" Zhang Yan slightly narrowed his eyes, but he could tell that the magic treasure was really ordinary. It was only used to control the power of the wind, clouds, and the sea. The problem was on the hanging flute island. The defensive formation here wasn't connected to the mountains, rivers, and the earth, so the magic treasure that was used to set up the formation wasn't strong enough to resist the demon. Elder Su felt the ground beneath his feet shaking more and more violently, and he said with a bitter smile, "Taoist Lu, we can't continue like this. It seems like we have to act earlier." Wang Nanshao helplessly said, "That's the only way." He turned his head to look at Zhang Yan, and his eyes were filled with anticipation. Zhang Yan smiled, and he stood up, and said in a clear voice, "I will naturally go with you." Chapter 892. Ever since the young cultivator waved the small flag, he had been observing the movements on the island. Not long after, a cloud of light slowly flew out from the island. He knew that the person below couldn't bear it any longer and was forced to come out. He couldn't help but smile. After Wang Nanshao arrived in the sky, he hid in the cloud and looked at his opponent from afar. He was secretly shocked. After not seeing him for a long time, this demon's cultivation seemed to have improved again. One must know that when one's cultivation reached the Yuanying realm, it would take a long time to polish every little bit of cultivation if it wasn't in a blessed place. However, this person defied common sense. It was very likely that he had a fortuitous encounter recently. He suddenly lost confidence. He hesitated for a moment and turned to Zhang Yan, cupped his hands and said, "This demon's magic power seems to have improved again compared to the last time. Daoist Lu and I will fight with him first." Although he wanted to borrow the strength of Zhang Yan, he was afraid that once he showed up, he would scare the opponent away. Based on the speed of this demon's cultivation, the next time he came, his mana would be even stronger. At that time, no one would be able to resist him. He needed to take this opportunity to get rid of him once and for all. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and nodded. Wang Nanxiao and Daoist Lu greeted and both of them went to the front. They coldly cupped their hands and said, "Greetings, Daoist Li." The young cultivator laughed and returned the greeting. He said confidently, "Wang Daoren, the last time we met, you were not my opponent. Today, it is still the same. I advise you to admit defeat as soon as possible. I won't kill you. I'll give you half a day. Take your disciples and leave as soon as possible." Although Wang Nanxiao was forced to the door, he didn't lose the demeanor of a cultivator. He didn't say anything harsh, but said coldly, "My master led the people here to establish the sect. Now, it's passed down to me. As a disciple, even if I'm useless, I won't be scared away by a few words." The young cultivator looked at Daoist Lu next to him and sneered. "Daoren Wang, I was wondering why you're so bold. So you've asked for help." Wang Nanxiao calmly said, "Daoren is not fellow Daoists' match in a one-on-one fight, so I asked for help. If this battle was only for personal gain, he wouldn't be so shameless. But this time, it was for the sake of protecting the sect, so he didn't care about his own reputation." The young cultivator couldn't help but chuckle, "You're quite self-aware." While the three of them were talking, Zhang Yan was also sizing up the young man in the clouds. In his opinion, it was not too much for Wang Nanxiao to call him a demon. Although this youth surnamed Li cultivated a chi path cultivation technique, he still couldn't hide the fishy and sweet demonic aura on his body. From this, it could be seen that he didn't cultivate an orthodox Taoist cultivation technique, but an unorthodox cultivation technique. Otherwise, he would definitely be able to hide his aura. He thought to himself, this person has cultivated for at least 600 to 700 years. It's not easy for a demon to cultivate to this stage. Not a single cultivation technique or spirit herb is missing. Most importantly, he needs a master to guide him. The West Sea is different from other places. Very few cultivators are willing to come here. Where did he learn his skills? Could he really be a disciple of a devil sect? Looks like I'll have to interrogate him later. The young cultivator suddenly felt a little uneasy, as if he had a feeling that today's matter wouldn't go smoothly. This thought came to him very inexplicably. However, he was determined to obtain this sea region, and he had a few tricks up his sleeves. He calmed his mind and stood up from the shell seat with a big laugh. He said to the two, "Daoren Wang, since words don't make sense, let's see who wins with our fists. Both of you come up together. After today, this land will have a new owner." Wang Nanxiao nodded to Daoist Lu. The two of them separated and took out their magic treasures. On Wang Nanxiao's side, there was a pair of magic swords that shone with a faint green light. On top of Daoist Lu's head, there was a golden centipede that shone brightly. It was so dazzling that even the surrounding dark clouds and fog couldn't conceal it. The young cultivator paid particular attention to the magic swords. He said with surprise, "Daoren Wang, you still have such good treasures. If you had taken them out last time, it wouldn't have been so easy to defeat you." Wang Nanxiao snorted. The magic swords were called Green Lightning Swords. They were originally a pair and were left behind by the previous island master. They were refined using hundreds of spirit herbs from the middle continent. When they flew, they moved like lightning and possessed great power, especially when it came to restraining demons. However, because the Hanging Flute Island was far above the West Sea, it wasn't easy to gather precious materials. They were afraid that it would be difficult to refine and repair the swords after they were damaged, so they didn't easily show them to others. Now that the sect was on the brink of extinction, they finally took them out to face the enemy. At this time, he no longer held back. He cast an incantation and flew up on the swords. Suddenly, there was a loud clap of thunder, and 2 green lights slashed down like dragons. When Daoist Lu saw him attack, he took out a small mallet and pointed it at the golden centipede, immediately knocking it 3 times. In an instant, 3 sounds of clouds splitting and stones piercing resounded. The aquatic demons watching the battle from the sidelines immediately held their heads and howled miserably. One by one, they fell from the waves. When the young cultivator heard these sounds, he was also in a daze. When he came back to his senses, the 2 green lightning swords were already in front of his eyes and nose. He couldn't dodge anymore. With a poochie sound, the swords pierced through his body. Daoist Lu was startled, then he said happily, "Did you succeed?" Wang Nanxiao frowned. When he looked again, he saw the fallen body emitting a cloud of black fog. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a piece of dried fish skin. It fell into the sea and disappeared. He looked around and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Daoist, be careful. This person used a Daoist technique to avoid it." A laugh came from the sky. The dark clouds parted, and the young cultivator floated out. He praised, "Daoren Wang, you really have some tricks up your sleeve. If I didn't have this death substitution technique, I would have really fallen into your trap." When Zhang Yan heard this, he smiled. The real death substitution technique was a superior technique. Even in the Devil's Doctrine, there weren't many people who could successfully cultivate it. This person's technique was at most a shedding technique. However, he didn't mean to look down on his opponent. Techniques were inherently divided into good and bad, but when it came to a real battle, it all depended on how one used it. If one used it in concert with one's body, the effect might not necessarily be worse than those superior techniques. Just like the black-yellow giant hand that he practiced. It wasn't a true superior Daoist technique, but when it was combined with his vast mana, it immediately showed infinite power. When Wang Nanxiao saw his opponent appear, he didn't say anything and slashed with his magic sword again. The young cultivator waved his hand, and a dozen smooth and round beads appeared from his sleeve. They collided with the green light. For a moment, thunder and lightning flashed, and the treasure light shot up to the sky. There was a deafening sound of collision. Seeing that the 2 of them were entangled, Taoist Lu didn't want to miss this opportunity. He used his mana to hit the golden centipede again, and the treasure vibrated again. The young cultivator sneered and formed a protective technique. He stood straight, but he was completely unharmed. Ever since he succeeded in his cultivation, the number of times he fought with others was actually not that many. His experience was still lacking. Just now when he encountered a method that he had never seen before, he suffered a loss. But now that he was prepared, it was impossible for him to suffer a loss again. However, the sound didn't stop, and he was tired of listening to it. Besides, if he didn't make a killing move now, there was no guarantee that the 2 of them would have other tricks waiting for him. Therefore, he divided some of his attention and took a deep breath. His abdomen swelled as if he had swallowed a big iron ball. Then, he puffed his cheeks and blew. Suddenly, a whistling wind came out and rushed forward with an unstoppable force. Wang Nanxiao's expression changed. He said, "Be careful, fellow Daoist." During the last battle, he was swept away by this strange wind and was swept away for more than 10 miles. When he came back, he blew out another breath before he could make a move. He couldn't get close to his opponent at all, and he couldn't use his magic treasures or Daoist techniques at all. After 4 or 5 rounds, his mana was almost exhausted, and he could only run away in embarrassment. Taoist Lu heard from him that this wind couldn't be resisted, so he only used his protective light and was ready to let him go. He would come back later. However, just as he did that, he suddenly felt something was wrong. The wind was mixed with countless black golden sand. Under the grinding, the protective light dimmed in the blink of an eye. He couldn't help but be shocked. At this time, the world was spinning, and he couldn't control his mana freely. He wanted to use his magic treasures, but he couldn't, and could only struggle to maintain it. The young cultivator smiled proudly. His supernatural power was called Startling Cloud Wind. Although it was powerful, it couldn't hurt people. Therefore, he had collected a lot of solid fine sand from the strange rocks at the bottom of the sea. Now that he scattered it into the wind, it immediately had a miraculous effect. Seeing his friend in danger, Wang Nanxiao was anxious and shouted, "Jinren Zhang, please help us." As soon as he said this, suddenly, there was a mighty manna falling, and the spiritual vigor within a radius of 10 miles was fixed. The clouds in the sky dispersed, and a handsome young Taoist walked out. His body was surrounded by clear light, and the spiritual qi was running like the tide. There was not a single cloud on top of him. As he came out, the turbid clouds in the sky dispersed, and the tide slowly receded. The young cultivator's eyes widened, and he cried out, "Yuanying Dharmakaya." However, after the shock, his face turned pale, and he revealed a terrified expression. A third-stage cultivator was not someone he could fight against. Now that he was trapped by the heaven and earth restriction, he couldn't escape. He was afraid that his life would be in danger today. Taoist Lu recovered from the shock. He straightened the Taoist hat on his head, and came up to express his gratitude. "Thank you for saving me." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "You're too kind. Even if I didn't help, you could still escape." Taoist Lu shook his head and sighed, "I'm ashamed. I panicked and lost my mind. If it wasn't for you, even if I didn't die, I would still be seriously injured. I don't know how to repay your kindness." Zhang Yan looked at the two of them, and pointed at the young cultivator. "If that's the case, how about you two hand this demon over to I?" Although Wang Nanxiao was somewhat unwilling, seeing that the demon that he found difficult to deal with had no power to resist Zhang Yan's hands, he hurriedly bowed his head and said, "This demon was captured by Taoist master. As for how to deal with it, how would the two of us dare to interfere?" Zhang Yan said with a smile, "Then I will take this demon away. Don't worry, I won't let it come back to cause trouble." Wang Nanxiao heard this and couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. He only needed to protect the mountain gate, and he didn't care about what would happen to the demon. Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves and a strong gust of wind engulfed him. Then, he flew for nearly 1,000 miles and landed on a rock on the sea. He threw him down and asked indifferently, "Where did you learn this skill from?" Chapter 893. Although the young cultivator had come into contact with many cultivators since he was successful in his cultivation, he had always kept his background a secret. Alas, he was the meat on the chopping block, he couldn't fight back. After struggling for a while, he said in a low voice, "This little demon's divine arts and Tao techniques were imparted by a stone statue." A stone statue imparting a technique? Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He had previously guessed that this person was either a remnant disciple of the Western continent, or that he had inadvertently obtained the abode of a predecessor. Because this place was close to the Middle Pillar continent, he had even thought of that person, but this answer was somewhat unexpected. He then asked, "What exactly is the general situation? Tell me in detail." The young cultivator had no choice but to reveal his origins. It turned out that his name was Li Xiumi, and his original form was a mutated vicious snakehead in the Western Sea. Not only could he forage in the sea, but he could also come up to the land. He could run between the reef islands and pounce on small beasts. Because it was nurtured by the spiritual vigor of the sea, after a long time, it gained sentience. Later on, when he was chasing after a spirit lizard, he accidentally landed on a deserted island. There, he encountered a stone statue that could speak, and he received its guidance. From then on, he cultivated a set of divine Tao techniques. When Zhang Yan heard this, he sighed in his heart. Even if this opportunity was not unique, it could be considered rare in the world. Although there were many wandering cultivators in the world who could cultivate to the Yuanying realm, if one were to look deeper, they would find that they had something to do with a sect. They really had no foundation. There were many reasons for this, but the most important one was that without guidance, even if one obtained a superior Tao book, it would be difficult to understand its meaning. If one were to forcefully practice it, it would be hard to avoid the danger of qi deviation. Without the support of the sect, without the help of the people of the same path, he would need to spend a lot of energy on finding spiritual items for cultivation. Where would he find the time to cultivate? Although he was alone and free, if he incurred enmity with someone or met a powerful enemy, without anyone to help him, he might not even be able to keep his life. But to Li Xiaomi, it was not a problem at all. Although the West Sea had been implicated by the 3 Western continents in the past, and its spiritual essence had declined prematurely, making it inferior to the other 3 seas. But a sea of phase. It's not a small number. Since he was born in the water tribe, with magic power behind him, he could naturally search for what he needed to cultivate in the vast ocean currents. Since ancient times, there were very few cultivators in this part of the sea, so they had never encountered any formidable opponents. After receiving the stone statue's guidance, he also wouldn't casually kill people. Every time a tribulation came, he even knew a way to avoid it, and he managed to cultivate to this stage safely. His luck was really good. But very few people could compare. Zhang Yan asked with interest, "The stone statue that guided you, could it be that it's also a spiritual monster?" Li Xiaomi said, "I thought so too at first, but after my cultivation went up, it was really just a stone statue that could speak human language, there was nothing special about it." At this point, he hesitated for a moment before continuing, "Or maybe it's because this little demon's knowledge is shallow and I can't see the true appearance." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment before asking, "Where is it now?" Li Xiaomi hesitated for a moment, but since he had already revealed the most secretive thing, there was no need to hide it. He said, "Head north, about a day's journey, and that's where the nameless island is." Zhang Yan asked a few more questions, then said, "You lead the way, bring me there to take a look." Li Xiaomi did not dare to disobey, so he agreed. Zhang Yan shook his sleeves, stirring up a strong wind from the flat ground, wrapping around the demon's cloud, and then flew towards the direction he pointed. 4 hours later, Li Xiaomi pointed to a small island below and said, "This is it." Zhang Yan looked down and saw that there was nothing special about the island. There was no formation door or prohibition, and there was no spiritual opportunity. If someone passed by the sea, they would not pay much attention. Under Li Xiaomi's guidance, he kept his mana and slowly descended. Finally, he stood in front of a steep mountain wall. Li Xiaomi took a few steps forward and pushed aside the grass, revealing a stone statue of a Taoist. It was in a sitting posture, and its face was similar to a real person, but it was only half the height of a human. He knelt down, kowtowed, and then called out softly, "Mr." Zhang Yan looked at the side and did not disturb him. From his senses, this stone statue was very strange. Although there was no spiritual opportunity, there was a trace of a spiritual talisman wrapped around it. After 100 breaths, suddenly the stone statue trembled slightly, and there was white smoke coming out from its 7 orifices. Then, a pair of stone eyes seemed to have become a little more lively, and said, "Xiaomi, did you bring a fellow Taoist here?" Li Xiaomi did not know how to answer. Zhang Yan took 2 steps forward and said with a smile, "I have not known fellow Taoist Li for long. I heard that he was imparted by you, and that was how he obtained his cultivation experience. I was curious, so I specially came to pay a visit." Who knew that when the stone statue heard it, not only did it not blame him, but it was also very happy, and said, "I have been on this island for many years, but this is the first time I have a visitor. It is a pity that I am alone, and have no tea or wine, so I can't treat you well." Zhang Yan smiled, "I should be the host for taking the liberty to visit." With a wave of his sleeve, a ball of clear air flew out and slowly dispersed. Then, a 3-story pagoda appeared, and he said, "Fellow Taoist, please come up for a chat." The stone statue saw that he did not see it as a different species, and instead treated it as a Taoist cultivator of the same generation. It felt extremely happy, and said, "Xiaomi, carry me up." Li Xiaomi went forward, carried the stone statue, and followed Zhang Yan into the pagoda. Inside the pagoda, Zhang Yan walked to the main seat, bowed, and said, "Fellow Taoist, please." Li Xiaomi hurriedly placed the stone statue on the guest seat gently. After it was properly placed, Zhang Yan also sat down, and called for Zhang Chan to serve tea. Even though he knew that the stone statue could not taste tea, he still served it a cup, and placed it in front of the stone statue. The stone statue was even more happy, and if it was not for the fact that it could not move, it would have probably started dancing. It only said, "It is my honor to be able to meet Taoist." Zhang Yan smiled, and said, "I have something to say, please forgive me, fellow Taoist." The stone statue said, "Please speak, Taoist." Zhang Yan said, "From what I see, you are neither a treasure nor a spirit, neither a demon nor a demon. May I know where you are from?" The stone statue said honestly, "I am a Taoist imparting instrument." The moment Zhang Yan heard the name, he knew its use, and nodded with a smile, and said, "Fellow Taoist does not have any mana, but you can guide fellow Taoist Li to this stage. You are indeed worthy of the name, Taoist imparting. I wonder which wise sage had such a skill. To infuse a true spirit into an artifact, it was not inferior to refining a true artifact. To be able to have such ability, one should at least be an image phase realm cultivator." The stone statue said, 10,000 years ago, there was a sect in the West Source continent called the Longevity Monastery. I was refined by the monastery head, Hao Rufeng, at that time. However, there were few disciples in the monastery, and one time, they encountered a great enemy. After a fierce battle, only this Taoist master survived, and he was also heavily injured. He was afraid that after he passed away, the sect would be severed, and there would be no one to enlighten the spirit of reincarnation, so he refined me. After Zhang Yan had a detailed discussion with Zhou Chengju, he knew a lot about the 3 West continents. He had also mentioned a few sections. However, he had never heard of the Longevity Monastery. As for the West Source continent, that was the name of the continent in the ancient times. Until now, the Taoist books and records had already changed to the West Qin continent. Zhang Yan said again, "According to what fellow Taoists said, you have been trapped in the body for 10,000 years, and since you have a true spirit, you can also harvest spiritual vigor, so why don't you try to escape?" The stone statue sighed, "It is not that I do not want to, but all the spiritual vigor I have harvested all these years have been used to maintain this trace of true spirit, and I have no spare energy to do other things. However, Taoist Master Hao once said that there is a talisman in this body, and as long as I leave behind a successor and reopen my sect, I will be able to escape." Zhang Yan glanced at Li Xiaomi, and smiled, and said, "I guess fellow Taoist Li is the person that fellow Taoist chose." Li Xiaomi grinned. It was not easy to open a sect, and he first needed to find a place of enlightenment. If it was not for the Xiandi island, he would not have made things difficult for that Daoran Wang, and ended up in Zhang Yan's hands. The stone statue said, "Although Xiaomi is a demon, he is wise. I taught him 5 magical arts, and he was able to comprehend 4 of them in a few years. As long as he does not make any mistakes, it is only a matter of time before the sect is restored." At this moment, Li Xiaomi showed a helpless expression. Among the 5 magical arts, there was an escape technique, and he believed that if he had learned it, he would not have been captured so quickly today. However, cultivating these techniques required a great deal of spirit medicine and precious materials, and they couldn't be found anywhere in the Western Sea. Only the sky-shocking gale only required one's own magic power, so it was the most effective. The stone statue said, "What is fellow Taoist doing in the West Sea? As far as I know, the West continent has been abandoned, and the cultivators have already left for the Central continent." Zhang Yan said, "I want to study the mysteries of heaven and earth with the help of the eroded writings, but there are not many of them left in the East continent. Thinking that the West continent is the source of the cultivators of the 9 continents, I came here." The stone statue was silent for a moment, and then said, "I remember something. More than 10,000 years ago, a few cultivators from beyond the heavens came and fought with the cultivators of the West continent. Among them was the eroded writings competition. Fellow Taoist, you can go and find them, and perhaps you will learn something." Zhang Yan's eyes lit up, and he asked, "Where are they?" The stone statue said, "These cultivators were all great cultivators. I heard that they used heaven and earth as their records, and used mountains and rivers as their writings. I don't know why, but I know that they are in the West Continent. If fellow Taoist is fated, you may be able to see them. Zhang Yan was slightly startled, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face, and then he nodded. Yes, the path of eroded writings originally contained the mountains and rivers of heaven and earth. It was a little narrow for him to only look for those that were carved on the tablets and jade scrolls. Once he thought about it, he suddenly felt enlightened, as if an invisible barrier had been opened, and his mind became very clear. He said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, your words have solved a barrier in Ai's heart, but I don't know how I should thank you." Li Xiumi's heart was moved, and she said, "How about fellow Taoist, take Mr. away from here." Zhang Yan smiled, "What do you think, fellow Taoist?" The stone statue refused, saying, "Although I don't have any spiritual energy, I have lived here for 10,000 years. Obviously, my fate has been decided. If I leave, I'm afraid there will be a disaster. Now that I have taught a disciple, I will be able to leave on the day of completion. If fellow Taoist is free, why don't you come and be my guest?" Seeing that he was unwilling, Zhang Yan didn't force him. After thinking for a while, he looked at Zhang Chan and said, "Go to the mountains and catch 2 land creatures." Zhang Chan said, "Master, this is easy. I will be back in a moment." He left the pagoda and flew into the forest. Not long after, he returned with 2 creatures, a white snake and a giant tortoise. Zhang Yan looked at them and nodded. Zhang Chan did a good job this time. The snake and tortoise were already more than 100 years old, and they had gained a bit of spirituality. Although they were still far from gaining spiritual wisdom, it wouldn't be difficult if they could get his help. He took out 2 form transformation pills and ordered Zhang Chan to stuff them into their mouths. Then, he stretched out his hand to help them. Not long after, the snake and the tortoise both transformed into 2 boys. However, they wore slightly bewildered expressions as they kowtowed incessantly. Zhang Yan looked at them and said, "Today, I will give you 2 pills, but not for free. You must take good care of this fellow Taoist. When the day of completion comes, you can leave on your own." Chapter 894. Zhang Yan chatted with the stone statue for a whole night and learned a lot. After all, the statue was a technique imparting artifact. It was knowledgeable and knew many secrets that ordinary cultivators didn't know about. Even though most of it was just old news, it was still useful for his trip to the West Continent. He bid farewell to the statue at dawn the next day, leaving only the snake and the tortoise behind to guard it. The statue couldn't move, so Li Xiumi sent him off. Li Xiumi followed him anxiously. He didn't know what Zhang Yan and Wang Nanshao were planning to do, so he couldn't guess how they would deal with him. Zhang Yan smiled when he saw this. Since this demon had nothing to do with the cultivators of the Devil's sect and was the one who had sent the stone statue to rebuild the sect, there was no need for Zhang Yan to make things difficult for him. He said, "When I took you away earlier, I promised fellow Taoist Wang that you would not be allowed to set foot on the Hanging Flute Island. If you can make an oath and abide by this promise, I will let you go." Li Xiumi felt like he was granted amnesty and said, "I'm willing to make an oath, I'm willing to make an oath." With a thought, a contract flew out from Zhang Yan's sleeve and floated 3 feet in front of him. At the same time, he said in a deep voice, "But words don't count. You need to sign a contract." Li Xiumi's heart trembled when he saw the contract. He knew that once he signed the contract, he would have to make an oath if he violated it in the future. Although he didn't want to pretend to agree, he felt a bit uncomfortable thinking about being bound by something in the future. He took a deep breath and took the contract. He released some of his blood essence and used his finger as a pen to write his name on the contract. Zhang Yan waited for him to finish. He took it back and read it briefly before putting it away. He said, "For the sake of fellow Taoist Shi, I have a message for you. If you establish a sect in the future, remember not to act recklessly and kill any living beings. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble." Li Xiumi complained, "Taoist priest, I've never harmed anyone because of Mr. Shi's guidance." Zhang Yan said with a faint smile, time flies. The world changes. Even if you don't think that way now, who knows what will happen in the future? Even if you don't do it yourself, can you guarantee that your disciples are also ordinary? However, I will not restrict you in this regard. If he acted recklessly, there was no need for I to take action. Naturally, someone will come looking for you. Li Xiaomi did not refute this time. He was a demon, and there would definitely be demons among his future disciples. If one's cultivation was not up to par, one's nature would take the upper hand, and one might make a mistake. Once this kind of thing started, it would be difficult to clean up. One had to know that regardless of whether it was the Central Pillar or the Western Sea, they were both human cultivators. If they were attacked by a group of cultivators, the outcome would be obvious. He lowered his head and thought for a while, then bowed solemnly to Zhang Yan and said sincerely, "Thank you for your guidance." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Take care." He turned around and boarded the flood dragon chariot. Then, the two flood dragons shook their heads and tails at the same time. Auspicious clouds appeared under their feet, and they carried the chariot into the sea clouds. Li Xiaomi stood where he was and bowed to the sky. This time, Zhang Yan's journey was smooth. After a few months of traveling across the vast ocean, he finally saw a gray shadow at the end of the horizon. He silently calculated his position and said, "This should be the west-sinking continent." The west-sinking continent was known as the West Constellation Continent in ancient times. Although it was the smallest among the three continents, 10,000 years ago, there were thousands of Taoist sects on the continent, and it could be said to be extremely prosperous. However, after that huge change, the middle of the continent caved in, and the surrounding mountains bulged out, separating the ocean from the sea, creating a huge lake. Zhang Yan came out of the pagoda and leaned on the railing. He saw that the mountain wall was steep, as if it was carved by an axe or a knife. It rose and fell straight down, reaching up to the clouds and down to the abyss of the sea. It spanned hundreds of millions of miles, surrounding the land of the continent. It was solemn and grand, showing the wonders of creation. Zhang Chan said in surprise, "Master, the terrain is so majestic." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "When that Taoist sure described the scenery of this continent, he used 4 lines, the eternal gates of heaven lock the spirit sea, when will the dragon python open? The birds fly across the clouds, the sound of the bridge morning, the sun setting beyond the heavenly mountains to refer to the scenery." Now, it seems that it is exactly as he said. Zhang Chan scratched his head and said, "Master, the land of the continent has been flooded. I'm afraid the erosion runes are gone too, right?" Zhang Yan smiled and did not say anything. The erosion runes created by the ancient almighties were all in accordance with the operation of heaven and earth. How could they disappear so easily? Even if the sea had changed into mulberry fields, there would still be traces of them. It was just that there would be some twists and turns in his search. However, with his level of understanding of the erosion runes, it would only take him a few more days. After a few more glances, he said, "Go forward." The flood dragon carriage moved, leaping over the peak and heading into the continent. As soon as he entered the continent, what he saw was a large lake that seemed to be formed by the gathering of the water from the sky. Smoke rose and the clouds flowed. He tried to discern it and felt some spiritual vigor. He was slightly surprised. He remembered that both Zhou Changju and the stone statue had said that the reason why the old land of the West Continent had become like this was because someone had rashly moved the earth's roots and caused the land to change. Calamities and tribulations arose and the spiritual vigor collapsed. In the end, the cultivators had no choice but to travel east to other continents to find another place of enlightenment. Although the spiritual vigor was weak, it was not completely gone. It was very different from what the two of them had said. He thought about it again and nodded slowly. As the saying goes, the weak are used by the Tao. Although the spiritual vigor of the 3 continents had been exhausted, the Earth's roots of the 9 continents still existed. After tens of thousands of years of recuperation and accumulation, and with no external disturbances, it had recovered a little. However, that was all. This little spiritual vigor could not be compared to the few continents of Donghua. It was even worse than the Dongxing continent. If cultivators from other continents came here, the most they could do was to maintain their mana. As for improving their cultivation, it was impossible. Based on the scene before him, it would take tens of thousands of years to return to the blessed land of cultivation in the past. As he was thinking, he suddenly heard the sound of flapping wings. He glanced over and saw that the flock of birds on the lake were frightened by the power of the flood dragon. They all flew up, but it was difficult to estimate their numbers. For a moment, they covered the sky and the sun, and the sound of their chirping was endless. There were also waves in the water, and it was obvious that many big fish were fleeing in panic. He thought to himself that if such a lake appeared in the Donghua continent, there would definitely be countless spirits and monsters born in the water. However, the spiritual vigor in this place was meager. Even if the birds and beasts grew larger, they would not be able to become monsters. At this moment, the flood dragon carriage slowed down. One of the flood dragons turned around and said, "Immortal, where should I go?" Zhang Yan looked into the distance. Although the main purpose of this trip was to observe the ancient eroding inscriptions, there was another thing he wanted to do. He wanted to kill the ferocious creature that was sealed here by the Tai Ming Grandmaster and devour its essence so that he could improve his divine contract. As for the 3 continents in the west, there was one in each boundary. Fortunately, with the help of the headmaster, he already knew the specific location, so there was no need to search around. He said, "Just go west." The 2 flood dragons let out a long roar and roused themselves. They pulled the pagoda and flew west. After traveling for 7 to 8 days in the boundless marsh, they saw a small continent in the distance. Zhang Chan muttered, "Could it be that we've reached our destination?" Zhang Yan counted with his fingers and nodded, "This is the place." Zhang Chan pointed down and said, "There seems to be someone there." Zhang Yan turned around and saw a few boats floating on the water. He said, "It seems that although the change 10,000 years ago was huge, it did not kill off all the mortals here." The flood dragon carriage moved forward for another 100 miles. The 2 flood dragons became restless and said, "Immortal, there seems to be something strange here." Zhang Yan also sensed it. If the people in the continent looked at it from a close distance, they might not see anything unusual. However, when he stood high up and looked at the surrounding 10,000 kilometers, he could see that this small continent was actually buried deep in the lake, like a whirlpool. However, the water that should have been low did not submerge it. Instead, it circled around the continent, as if it was repelled by an invisible force. Apart from that, the island was also shrouded by an unknown demonic aura. The aura was extremely strong, and it was incompatible with the thin spiritual vigor around it. His eyes narrowed. This was most likely the doing of the ferocious creature. It seemed that even if the monster had not escaped, it was not far away. At this moment, Zhang Chan volunteered, "Master, why don't I go and take a look?" Zhang Yan shook his head. The ferocious creature in the West Trap continent was called the thousand-eyed flower toad. Among the 6 ferocious creatures, its mana was not the strongest. However, it had the ability to determine its own fortune and avoid harm. Since it was about to escape, it would not have thought that the Qinsang school would send someone to suppress it. Looking at the current situation, it seemed that they had made some arrangements. To be able to shroud the entire island, even if it had not fully recovered, its mana was not much weaker than his. Moreover, Zhang Chan's cultivation experience was not weak. Once he entered, he might alert the enemy. He could not act rashly. With a thought, he immediately had an idea. He shook his sleeve and released the immortal incarnation that he had previously refined. Then, he stretched out his hand and pointed at it. He separated an extremely small strand of his soul and attached it to it. Then, he gently pushed it on his shoulder and sent it down. The incarnation was originally sitting cross-legged with its eyes closed. When it reached the ground, it opened its eyes and tidied up its Taoist robe. It then walked towards a fishing village that came into view. The body's appearance was 60% similar to Zhang Yan's. However, it had the appearance of a middle-aged Taoist. It attracted the attention of the ferocious creature. There was a little mana in its body, but it was enough to deal with mortals. After walking for a mile, it saw a sturdy fisherman mending his fishing net on the beach. 2 4- to 5-year-old urchins were chasing and playing beside him. Zhang Yan's incarnation walked forward and greeted, "Fisherman, please." The fisherman had already noticed him. Seeing him greet him, he was stunned. Then, he hurriedly put down his work, wiped his clothes and raised his hands to greet him. The 2 urchins also stopped playing and ran over to surround him curiously. They even touched his clothes from time to time. The fisherman was shocked. He quickly pulled the 2 urchins over and apologized profusely. The incarnation did not mind and said that it was fine. Then, it said, "I am a chi practitioner from outside the mountain. I came to your place by boat. May I know what world this is?" The fisherman came to a realization. He sighed and said, "Taoist, you must have come from another continent to seek refuge here. This is not easy. I heard that there are a few islands out there that have been flooded. Only my surging spring continent has the protection of the mountain god, so it did not suffer." Chapter 895. Zhang Yan's incarnation followed the fisherman's words and asked further. Only then did he find out that other than this place, there were quite a number of small continents scattered across the lake like stars. There were big and small ones, and there were many traces of people on them. There were also dynasties that changed, and the lords of a region were like the feudal lords of small countries. However, in these 100 years, there were always inexplicable floods that drowned quite a number of continents. Only the gushing spring continent was abnormally stable. Even if there were huge waves, they would quickly recede. Therefore, in recent years, there were quite a number of people who escaped to this place by boat. The incarnation was slightly interested in the mountain god and couldn't help but ask a few more questions. However, the fisherman was limited in his knowledge, so when he asked about such things, he was always at a loss. In the end, he slapped his head and said, "How could I forget about this? I can bring Taoist priest to see the clan elder. He was once an official in the prefecture city, maybe he can explain it to you." The incarnation said, "That's great." The fisherman excitedly led him into the village. After walking for about 2 to 3 miles, the 2 of them arrived at the village. The place wasn't big, and it looked like there were about 100 people. Most of the houses were built with big stones, and they were quite thick. It must have been built to withstand the strong winds on the water. After walking for a short while, the fisherman stopped in front of a huge house. Not only was there a stone lion guarding the door, there were also high walls and cornices. One look and one could tell that it wasn't an ordinary house. The fisherman went forward to knock on the door, and after a while, an old man who was guarding the door came out. He said a few words to the old man, and the latter popped his head out to take a look. He said, "Wait." Then, he closed the door. From the sound of footsteps, he went inside. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the door opened, and an old man with a walking stick walked out. He was about 70 years old, and his hair was white. He wore a green robe. He seemed to be in good spirits, and behind him, there was a strong follower who never left his side. He sized up the incarnation. In the past, there were also people who came to this place to escape, but none of them had this appearance. He knew that the incarnation had a background, so he came forward and bowed, "Taoist priest, greetings." The incarnation already knew from the previous conversation that the people in this village all had the surname, Shi, so he bowed and said, "Shi Gong, greetings." "I don't deserve it." Shi Gong stood there and didn't come over. He only said slowly, "I wonder which god did Taoist priest worship?" The incarnation said, "I have never worshipped a god." Shi Gong heard these words. There wasn't much expression on his face. He only said, "I don't know how Taoist priest is in other places, but in my gushing spring region, if it's convenient to travel outside, you must pay your respects to the gushing spring mountain god." The incarnation understood what he meant. He laughed and said, "Thank you Shi Gong for speaking frankly. I will go to the temple later to offer incense." Shi Gong saw that he had listened to him. His expression softened a little as he raised his walking stick and pointed it at the door. He said, "Invite the Taoist priest in to talk." The incarnation followed him into a large hall. The old man invited him to sit down, and after the servant served him a cup of tea, he knocked on the side and inquired about the incarnation's origins. This incarnation was not Zhang Yan's own body, but merely a strand of his soul. The mana of memory was also created out of thin air. If one disregarded the origin, they were actually two different people. Therefore, in his mind, the place where he came from did indeed exist, and there was nothing to hide. He told the truth, "I came from Bai Huizhou. I drifted on the water from east to west for several months before arriving at your place." Bai Huizhou. Shi Gong muttered twice, but felt that he had never heard of this place before. However, there were countless islands in this swamp known as Guanglan, so it was not strange that he did not know of it. He asked again, "Did Taoist priest come here alone?" The incarnation sighed and said, "There were more than 10 people when I came, but we encountered a giant beast in the water and the boat capsized. Fortunately, a few disciples risked their lives to protect me, and only I managed to escape with my life. It's a pity that the others were all eaten by the fish." Shi Gong hurriedly comforted him, then stroked his beard and changed the topic. "May I ask where Taoist priest is heading to?" The incarnation said, "I'm looking for a safe place to live." Shi Gong laughed and said, "Then there's something to talk about." The incarnation cupped his hands and said, "Please advise me, Shi Gong." Shi Gong looked at him and asked, "Taoist priest wants to go to the inner continent, do you have any treasure with you?" The incarnation asked curiously, "What treasure?" Shi Gong cupped his hands towards the sky and said, "His Majesty has once issued a decree that if people from other continents want to move into our continent, if they have a spiritual treasure to offer, they will be rewarded generously. The highest can be a county magistrate, and even the lowest can be rewarded with 100 mu of land." The incarnation couldn't help but look sideways and asked, "There's such a good thing, what kind of treasure is it? Does gold, pearls, and jade artifacts count?" Shi Gong shook his head and said, "Naturally not those common objects, but objects with spirit." Objects with spirit. The incarnation lowered his head and thought for a while, then took out a jade talisman from his sleeve and said, "Shi Gong, do you think this counts?" Shi Gong turned his head and instructed. The long attendant beside him ran into the house and brought out a copper plate. It was polished to the point that it could reflect one's reflection, and there was a shallow layer of water in the plate. He pointed and said, "Taoist priest, please put this item into the plate." The incarnation placed the jade talisman into the plate, and after a while, the copper plate trembled slightly and released a ray of red light, illuminating the entire hall. Shi Gong revealed a look of surprise and said, "This is undoubtedly a top spiritual treasure." To be able to find a spiritual treasure for the monarch, as the person who introduced him, he had done a meritorious deed, so he would also be rewarded. His expression couldn't help but become more fervent, and he cupped his hands together and said, "Taoist priest, please stay here for the night. Tomorrow, I will bring Taoist priest to see the gate guard of Jinling City." The incarnation repeatedly thanked him. It was already dusk time. The minister of Shi ordered people to serve wine and dishes, and invited Wei Xiaobao to join them. When the lanterns were lit, he politely escorted Wei Xiaobao out, and arranged for people to find a comfortable guest room for him to stay. On the second day, the incarnation followed Shi Gong to see the gate guard, and specially went to the mountain god temple to pay a visit. Immediately, the temple devotee bestowed him with a qi cultivation method, and asked him to go out to sea to search for spiritual objects. If he succeeded, he could even be summoned by the mountain god. However, the incarnation had the cultivation method in his memory, so he didn't bother to do it. Just like that, a month passed, and the reward from the country had yet to arrive. Suddenly, he had the urge to travel, and took a boat to the lake to fish. However, for some reason, he suddenly yawned, and felt sleepy. In the end, his body tilted, and he fell into a deep sleep. At this moment, there was a ray of spiritual light that flew out from his body, and headed towards the east. In one breath, it flew 100 miles away, and flew into the pagoda on the water. At this moment, Zhang Yan was sitting on a cattail hassock. When he saw the ray of spiritual light, he raised his hand and caught it in his palm. Then, he silently chanted a spell, and in an instant, he knew everything that the incarnation had said and done for the past month. This mountain god's aura is the same as the demonic aura on the island, so it must be the thousand-eyed demon toad. From the rumors, this demon can already transform into an incarnation to travel, and can even attend the banquet in the imperial court. Looking at this situation, it seems that it is no longer suppressed by the prohibition, but it still has no power to leave this island, so it needs to steal spiritual opportunity from the spiritual treasure in order to escape. As for the matter of searching for spiritual treasures, perhaps the mortals here only thought that the king was fond of rare items, but he could see the real reason with one look. The West Fall state was different from the East Flower and East Xing states. Spiritual opportunity was not flourishing, and even if it escaped from the prohibition, it was already difficult to maintain its body from breaking down, and to recover to its peak would be as difficult as ascending to heaven. And absorbing spiritual opportunity from the spiritual treasure was indeed a feasible way. Zhang Yan once heard from the stone statue that not all the sects were willing to abandon their sect's foundations and head east. Many sects still had the thought of turning back, and sealed many of their treasures in the old land of their mountain. If the demon toad could find one or two of them, it would undoubtedly be able to cultivate some mana. Although it would not be able to recover its cultivation level, but if it accumulated enough, it could help it leave the continent. Once it reached a place like the Middle Pillar state where spiritual opportunity flourished, with ample time, it would not be difficult for it to recover its previous supernatural powers. Zhang Yan smiled coldly. This thousand-eyed toad had put in a lot of effort to help him escape, and it even knew how to make use of mortals in exchange for a normal demon. How would it have thought of this? From this, it could be deduced that this demon was at its weakest, and it was the perfect time for him to strike and destroy it. However, in this continent, there were millions of households. Once a fight broke out, it would be hard to avoid the repercussions, and the lives would be lost. Moreover, this demon toad had been operating on his island for a long time, and it might have set up some powerful tricks. Hence, he had to think of a way to lure it out of its nest. He thought for a while, and immediately came up with an idea. He came out of the pagoda, stirred up the wind and clouds, and headed towards the water. After traveling for hundreds of miles, he stopped. With a wave of his hand, he instantly activated the 5 elements escape technique, and a vast amount of mana spread outwards. In an instant, countless silt from the bottom of the lake rolled up, and moved to the surface of the water, and gathered at one spot. As his mana continued to circulate, more and more soil and rocks gathered at this spot. In less than half a day, he actually created an island out of thin air. He floated to the top of a hill, reached into his sleeve, and took out the box of fish pearls that Wang Nanshao gave him. He opened the box, and instantly, there was a spiritual light and the aura of treasure emitted from it. If the people on the Gushing Spring Islands saw it, they would definitely come looking for it. However, that was not enough. He thought for a while, and with a flip of his wrist, he held the bottle in his hand. Then, he took out a ball of earth essence chi, and poured it into the fish pearls. Receiving the nourishment of the earth essence, all the precious pearls instantly trembled. In a flash, a ray of light shot up into the sky, and blossomed into the sky. In the night sky, it was unusually bright, and could be seen clearly from hundreds of miles away. Zhang Yan smiled, and with a shake of his hand, scattered the precious pearls around the island. Although the light was scattered, it covered a wider area. This appearance was very much like the appearance of a treasure buried deep underground. He was not afraid that the demon toad would not come, and when that time came, he could continue to write. He circled the area again, and wiped away some traces that were too deliberate. Then, he returned to the pagoda, ordered the dragon carriage to rise up, and went to wait in the clouds. On the next day, there were a few people who came. These people all had some mana on them, but with one look, it was obvious that they were attached to the pearls with unorthodox techniques. They did not cultivate it themselves, but borrowed it from other things, and the owner could take it back at any time. These people stayed on the island for a few days, and after that, more than 100 people came one after another. In total, they picked up no less than 10 fish pearls and returned. Zhang Yan looked at them coldly, and did not go forward to stop them. This was just the bait that he put down. When he returned, the demon toads saw that these fish pearls contained some earth essence. It would not be able to endure it anymore. It would definitely give up everything and come looking for it. At that time, he would be able to fight it out. Chapter 896. In the surging spring continent's peaceful life temple, a man with a sage-like bearing stood under a peach tree, and he held a jade pearl in his hand as he looked at it over and over again. His face was sometimes filled with bewilderment, and sometimes filled with joy. He muttered to himself, "That's strange. Where did the earth spirit chi in the pearl come from? Could it be that the spiritium of the west continent is flourishing again?" However, as soon as the words left his mouth, he laughed and shook his head. In the land of the west continent, there was no doubt that the spiritual opportunity would be restored in the future. However, that would require a long period of accumulation. There was no possibility of it appearing overnight. Otherwise, the cultivators back then would not have needed to find another place to cultivate. Combined with the treasured light that shot into the sky from the southwest 2 days ago, he determined that it was extremely likely that the treasures hidden by these people had emerged into the world before they left for the east. This was not impossible. Back then, the western continent cultivators had suffered the consequences precisely because they wantonly extracted the earth chi. It was not surprising that 1 or 2 such spiritual treasures had been preserved to this day. Thinking of this, his expression became slightly excited. He thought to himself, this treasure has been hidden underground for tens of thousands of years. It should have accumulated a lot of earth chi. If I can get my hands on it, I won't have to be trapped here anymore. If the earth chi was hidden in the mountains and rivers, as long as it was not completely dispersed by external forces, it would absorb the essence of heaven and earth. Treasures refined with this earth chi, even if they were damaged and not refined, would be restored after a long time. If he could get his hands on it, it would be convenient for him to do things. Although he was able to walk on his own, it was only a borrowed body. His real body was still recuperating deep underground. Back then, during the great battle between human cultivators and heavenly demons, he was confident that he could predict good or bad luck, so he acted in an ostentatious and unbridled manner. He had indeed killed quite a few ancient chi practitioners. Later, before Tai Ming Jinren made his move, he first concealed the heavenly secrets, so he was sealed and suppressed in a situation where he was defenseless, unlike Guiyuan Jun who had made arrangements in advance, and even his natal pearl was taken away. After being imprisoned for more than 10,000 years, even though it had the body of a sky demon and its body had not decayed, its blood essence was almost exhausted. It was impossible for it to control the demon toad's body. As for his soul, it was even worse. At this point, only a strand of it was left. Not to mention the fact that he couldn't use many of his innate divine abilities. Even the ability to distinguish between fortune and misfortune had been lost. Therefore, he planned to first create a treasure to cross the sea and send this body to the East continent. Then, he would try to find blood to feed his body and use the essence-condensing pearls that were tens of thousands of years old. He shouted to the outside. He said, "Men." Immediately, 2 people who looked like servants trotted in with their bodies lowered. He knelt down from afar. "What instructions do you have, divinity?" The toad demon said, "Tell His Majesty that there is a spiritual creature appearing on the water. Tell him to prepare a boat that can withstand the wind and waves. I'm going out to search." This body had been nourished by his own blood essence for over 100 years, he had already cultivated to the 4th rank of strength path and could already soar through the clouds. However, this magic power was accumulated bit by bit, he did not want to use it unless it was absolutely necessary. The servant said, "May I know when the divinity will depart?" The toad demon said, "The faster the better." After a pause, he added, "That spiritual item might be able to refine the longevity pill. If we're too late, others might beat us to it." The servant kowtowed heavily on the ground and said, "This lowly one will pass down the decree now." The king of the gushing spring continent was already old and frail. When he heard that they were going to search for the longevity pill and that it was related to that spiritual light, he became impatient and immediately passed down the decree, mobilizing several large boats and sending over 1,000 imperial guards to protect them. The toad demon did not refuse. Maybe there were already people from other countries on the island. With these guards, they could chase them away. After noon that day, he led everyone to board the boat and sailed southwest. During the day, he relied on his senses to sense the location, while at night, the treasure light guided them, so the direction was the same. After a day and a night, they were already close to the island. However, the closer he got, the more uneasy he felt. In the past, when he predicted that something bad would happen to him, it was the same situation. He frowned and thought, strange, could it be that there is something on the island that can hurt me? He thought about it, and felt that it could be that the spiritual treasure had a true spirit, or a true weapon, which could threaten him. Thinking about this, he was not shocked, but happy. Even if it was a true weapon, a 10,000-year seal, but it did not fly towards his home, then it was very likely that it was in the same predicament as his own. If he could erase the true spirit and snatch it, then it would be enough to break the current situation. As for whether someone set up a trap to ambush him, he did not think too much about it. Because in his mind, if someone had the ability to subdue him, they would have already killed their way to his door. As for the life and death of mortals, those chi practitioners did not care. When the big boat was only a few miles away from the island, he did not wait for the small boat to be lowered. He leaped into the air, his sleeves fluttered, and he rode on the clouds with the help of the wind. When the people on the boat saw this, they exclaimed, and many servants knelt down and kowtowed to him. Once he reached the island, he went straight to the place where the spiritual vigor was the most abundant. Not long after, he arrived at a small hill, and he circled around it. After carefully sensing it, he noticed that the spiritual energy within was scattered, and there was at most 3 or 4 years of spiritual energy here. He instantly knew that something was wrong. He also made a prompt decision, and without saying a word, he immediately soared up a black smoke, and it surged as he wanted to leave the island. However, at this moment, an extremely majestic manna suddenly pressed down from the sky, and it had already fixed his body in place. Seal the heaven and earth? The toad demon's heart thumped, and he looked up into the sky. A carriage appeared in the clouds, and it was pulled by 2 fierce dragons. On the carriage stood a handsome young Taoist. He wore a black robe and a magic crown, and his robe fluttered with the wind. His entire body was filled with qi of the Tao, and astral currents revolved around him. His eyelids twitched. This aura was obviously a cultivator that had cultivated a qi Tao Dharma body, and he was just a step away from stepping into the elephant phase realm. If it was 10,000 years ago, he wouldn't be afraid, but now he had no choice but to admit defeat. He cupped his hands and said in a deep voice, I don't seem to have any grudges with this Taoist. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, I Qinsang Zhang Yan, I am from the lineage of the great underworld patriarch. Today, I came here especially to settle the 10,000 years of karma with Taoist. During the ancient heaven demon battle, Qinsang hadn't established a sect yet, so the toad demon had never heard of it. However, when the 4 words Great Underworld Patriarch came out, his heart jumped, but he pretended to not understand, and said, What 10,000 years of karma? I don't understand. Zhang Yan said with a faint smile, Taoist, why don't you admit it? Even if you wear human skin, you can't hide that heaven demon chi that can scare dragons. When the toad demon heard this, he was silent for a while, then he said coldly, I didn't expect that you still came to find me. He raised his head and said, This Taoist Zhang, can you let me go? I can swear that I will only live in seclusion in the mountains, and will never come into the world to harm people. What do you think? Zhang Yan smiled and shook his head, and said, This method is not appropriate. This kind of 10,000-year-old demon. He didn't know how many methods he had. An oath could bind others, but it might not be able to bind him. The toad demon stared at him and said, Then what do you want? Once he fought with someone, then the little bit of cultivation he had just accumulated would be used up. Even if he won, it would take hundreds or thousands of years to recover. If he could avoid fighting, he would try his best not to. Zhang Yan looked down and said seriously, I have an order from the sect. Your demon body must be removed, but your soul can be allowed to reincarnate, and I will recommend you to become a disciple of a great master in your next life. What do you think? The toad demon's face darkened. If it was a normal demon, if it was forced to reincarnate and knew that it could still become a disciple of a big sect in its next life, it wouldn't be so resistant. But he was a heaven demon, how could he be willing to become a human again? He frowned, and said calmly, Taoist, I see that you have reached the third stage of yuanying. I'm afraid you are already searching for the method to enter the manifestation realm, right? In the past, I have obtained many superior skills. If you don't make things difficult for me, I am willing to give them to you. When Zhang Yan heard this, he only smiled slightly. The toad demon looked at him, and nodded. That's right, you are of the great underworld Doran's lineage, you naturally don't care about other people's Dao skills. How about this, I know the location of several small worlds opened by Qi refiners in the past, I can tell you all of them. Fearing that Zhang Yan didn't know what kind of small worlds they were, he reported the names of the people who opened them one by one, and finally, he said, these are all ownerless lands, Daoists need not be afraid of people investigating. Zhang Yan heard many old stories from the stone statues, and these people's names were mentioned before. All of them were extraordinary, but they were all people who died fighting with heaven demons over 10,000 years ago. However, he was unmoved, and only said, Daoists need not waste your effort, I only saw that you didn't do any evil things after breaking the restriction, and instead, you protected the peace of this place, so I am giving you a chance, don't make a mistake. The toad demon was after all a lord among demons, just now, it was already not easy for him to compromise. Now that he heard this, he couldn't bear it anymore, and laughed loudly. Then, his expression turned fierce. He originally didn't want to waste his vitality, but since he couldn't persuade him, then he could only fight. His throat moved, and he swallowed a drop of blood essence that he kept in his mouth all year round. In an instant, a ferocious aura spread out, and his cultivation rose sharply, instantly entering the perfection stage of rank 4. His body also grew taller, and in the blink of an eye, he grew to about 300 feet tall. Both his feet stood on the island, and he pressed his abdomen, and opened his mouth towards the sky, shouting loudly. Instantly, a shocking shockwave surged out, like a raging waterfall that flowed against the flow. When it reached the sky, it was like a thick cloud that spread out, and a rotten smell could be smelled inside. Zhang Yan's expression was normal, and he stood in the void without dodging. In the sky behind him, yellow smoke came from all directions, and instantly gathered into a huge hand that was 100 feet tall. When it was condensed to the peak, the hand flipped and slammed down. When the two clashed, an earth-shattering sound resounded in the sky above West Sink continent. The demon toad saw that the huge hand was destroyed, and he stared at Zhang Yan, and suddenly, a white light shot out from his eyes. Zhang Yan's body still did not move, but a golden leaf flew out, and a golden curtain fell down, blocking in front of him. When the white light collided, it suddenly turned into smoke, and surrounded the leaf, continuously corroding the spiritual qi on it, and obviously had the effect of polluting the magic treasure. At the same time, the toad demon lowered his body slightly, and with a loud roar, he leaped with all his might, and his huge body smashed upwards with a loud bang. He could naturally see that this Daoist was extremely powerful, and his magic treasures were not ordinary. If they continued to fight like this, even if he did not lose on the battlefield, if the battle dragged on for a long time, his magic power would not be enough, and he would definitely lose. Thus, he could only use a strange plan. Right now, if he rushed forward, as long as the other party gave way, he could break through the cloud, and let the trillions of golden moon bugs down. Then, he could delay him, and he could die together with him. Even if he gave up this body, he could start over again, but the other party would not have such a chance. Chapter 897. The giant that was hundreds of feet tall suddenly leaped into the sky, bringing along a wave of oppressive and evil wind. The island shook violently, the ground cracked and rocks shattered, almost collapsing. Zhang Yan saw that he was courageous and looked like he was staking it all on one throw. Although he could not guess his true intentions immediately, he was experienced in battles and knew that no matter what his opponent wanted to do, he must not let him do as he wished. He pointed downwards and thunder rumbled in the sky. Hundreds and thousands of 5 elements devil-slaying thunder struck down like a storm. The toad demon saw so many thunder and fire coming towards him and was shocked. He channeled his mana and blew out a wisp of white smoke from his nose, covering his entire body. Not a single bit was left out. As a sky demon, he originally had the pearl of life on him. His body was surrounded by evil spirits and normal techniques would not be able to touch him. But now that he was like a dragon swimming in shallow waters, he could only use his mana as a price to defend. As he charged up, thunder and lightning struck down, tearing a hole in the cloud on his body from time to time. In the blink of an eye, it would be filled up again. His speed was extremely fast. Not long after, he was already in the sky and was not far from the high cloud. Zhang Yan saw this and smiled. He stimulated his mana and the power of the thunder and lightning in his hand multiplied. It pressed down even more fiercely than just now. The atmosphere crackled and the rumbling sound did not stop. In just a moment, more than half of the protective cloud on the toad demon's body was destroyed. He could not even repair it in time. He did not expect Zhang Yan's mana to be so strong. Instantly, he panicked. If this continued, it was very likely that his protective cloud would be destroyed before he could break through the high cloud. However, the current situation was very awkward. He was there for half a day. He was in the middle of nowhere to hide and he could not retreat. He could only charge forward. Maybe there would be some hope of defeating the enemy. Thinking about this, he roared and did not hold back anymore. He squeezed out all the mana in his body and turned it into clouds of smoke. He protected his body firmly and did not want to give up. He charged up against the thunder and lightning. Zhang Yan looked on coldly. Seeing that he was about to come up, he ordered the 2 flood dragons who wanted to dodge, crash into him. The 2 flood dragons did not dare to disobey. They roared and stirred up the wind and clouds. He grabbed the pagoda and swooped down. It was true that the other party had the aura of a sky monster. But at the end of the day, it was just a human body that cultivated strength path techniques. In terms of cultivation, they weren't necessarily weak. Monster Toad thought that these chi practitioners were all people who cherished their bodies. If he were to pounce forward with such a suicidal look, the other party would most likely choose to retreat, and he would be able to succeed. But never had he imagined that Chen Shi would actually be so dauntless and actually collide with him without the slightest fear. This caused him to greatly miscalculate. He was resolute and knew that he couldn't do anything, so he snorted and attached his soul onto a golden talisman before flying off with a swish and vanishing without a trace. At the same time, the body collided with the 2 flood dragon chariots. Rumble. The scales in the sky shattered and blood splashed everywhere. The 2 flood dragons' bones and tendons were shattered in this collision, and they fell down in a daze. The demonic toad's incarnation was in an even worse state. In a split second, it shattered. The pagoda was protected by restrictions, so it wasn't damaged at all. However, it was still shaking. Zhang Yan was calm, using his spiritual power to stabilize it. He then reached out and grabbed the cloud's sun gold lock. With just a bit of strength, he pulled the 2 flood dragons back. He looked out and saw that the flesh and blood that were scattered showed no signs of merging back together. It was obvious that he had given up on this body. Just now when the soul left, he sensed it. However, he didn't know what it was using to fly so quickly, such that he couldn't stop it in time. However, he was prepared for it and had made arrangements, so he didn't need to worry too much. At that moment, the 2 flood dragons roared. The broken scales and claws regrew, and in a blink of an eye, they were back to normal. Zhang Yan turned back to the pagoda and sat down. A voice came from inside, "Go to the gushing spring continent." On the other side, the demonic toad was fleeing in panic. His golden talisman was only fast at first, but after 1,000 miles, it gradually slowed down. He said with hatred, this junior made all my previous efforts go to waste. If I can recover, I will return this humiliation 100 times over. Because he was trapped in the West Continent for a long time, he didn't know if Tai Mingjinren was still in this world. Therefore, he didn't dare to mention the Qinsang school in fear of being censed. This person's next step will be to find me in the Gushing Spring Continent. That place is no longer safe. I need to change places. Fortunately, I have made arrangements. He didn't return to his lair, but went in another direction. At the same time, another soul flew out from the Gushing Spring Continent's Ning Shou Temple. This time, it flew in another direction. He was planning for the worst. These two souls went in different directions. Even if one of them was killed, the other one would survive and try to rise again in the future. After flying for a while, he suddenly felt something was wrong. He saw golden-winged insects flying in the air, and they kept coming closer to him. There were more and more of them gathering. At first, he didn't care, but now that he saw it, he knew it wasn't an ordinary insect. It was a demon that had cultivated successfully. He was shocked. At this moment, a strange insect with a bloodline behind it flew over. The densely packed eyes on its head were staring at him. It looked like it was about to pounce on him. The demonic toad turned the golden talisman and tried to avoid it. But unknowingly, the sky was filled with such strange insects. They had surrounded him, and he had nowhere to go. He thought to himself, ever since I escaped, I've never seen any Taoist cultivators or demons here. It must be that Taoist Zhang's doing. I can't fight him head-on, so I need to use words to hold him down, or else I'll really be in trouble. The golden talisman suddenly stopped, and a membrane bulged out. It then turned into a fist-sized jade toad. It opened its mouth and squatted there, saying, "Where did you come from, demon insect? Stop, I have something good for you." When the crimson bug heard this, it stopped moving. Its body shook, and it transformed into a pale-faced youth. "What benefits? Tell me, I'll listen." The demonic toad said, "Although your cultivation is high, you don't have the proper technique. Your foundation is shallow, and the qi in your body is too impure. I have the proper technique. If you don't make things difficult for me, let me go, and I will tell you." Zhang Chan rolled his eyes and said, "Tell me first." The demonic toad sneered in his heart, but he didn't hesitate and said the incantation sentence by sentence. Zhang Chan could not help but be entranced by the story. When the demonic toad got to the end, his tone suddenly changed, and he said, "But if you want to cultivate the fruit of Tao with this technique, you still need one thing." Zhang Chan couldn't help but ask, "What item?" The demonic toad's words had a hint of bewitchment, and he said, "That is naturally the heaven demon's blood essence." "Like my heaven demon. The qi of the sun and moon is essence, and you are born with endless lifespan. You only cultivated it after birth. If you can get a drop of my blood essence, you can use it to refine the impure qi in your body. You might be able to do so in the future." Zhang Chan smiled sinisterly, "Why go through so much trouble? I know your true body is under the Gushing Spring Continent. After I kill you, I can go get it myself." The demonic toad laughed, "There is only a strand of my soul here. The main soul is still in the body. If you do that, how can I let you have your wish when the time comes?" Zhang Chan also chuckled, and said, "You really have your wishful thinking. I want your blood essence, so I have to protect you. But I don't believe that you are the only heaven demon in this world. I will eat you first, and let this young master see what a heaven demon tastes like." When he finished, he called out, and the thousands of golden bugs in the surroundings surged over. This strand of the demonic toad's soul originally didn't have any remarkable abilities, but it was attached to the golden talisman. Seeing that its words didn't have any effect, it immediately turned into a strand of rainbow light, and wanted to struggle for the last time. But surrounded by the countless golden bugs, it was like a drop of oil falling into water. After struggling a few times, its treasure light was exhausted, and it could only hide inside, and not come out again. But that golden talisman was refined from something, and no matter how it was bitten, it couldn't be damaged at all. Zhang Chan couldn't help but click his tongue in wonder, but he didn't stretch out his hand to touch it, and allowed a little bug to hug it with its claws. This kind of ancient demon, who knew what tricks it had, and he didn't want to fall into any schemes. He shook his body, and transformed back to his original form. He summoned the swarm of bugs, and flew towards the direction of the gushing spring continent. Half a moment later, he saw the dragon carriage in the distant sky, and hurriedly flew over. When he got close, he said proudly, "Master, I acted according to Master's instructions, and indeed, that demonic toad has already captured its soul, and is waiting for Master to deal with it." He waved his hand, and a little bug presented the golden talisman. Zhang Yan smiled, and said, "You have done a good deed." Heavenly demons didn't have an endless lifespan, and even though their bodies could live forever, their souls weren't like that. Every bit of damage would be used up, so even if it was just a strand of its soul, the demonic toad wouldn't bear to be killed here. If it got rid of it, and reincarnated as a human, it would be fine, but if it escaped with the blood essence, the consequences would be hard to predict. The two-headed dragon, however, was a little unconvinced, and thought, if it wasn't for us two brothers working hard, how could this little bug have the chance to take advantage of us? But after what happened last time, they knew that this little bug had made a blood oath with Zhang Yan, and could be counted as a trusted subordinate, not something the two brothers could compare to. So they only muttered a few words in their hearts, but they didn't say it out loud. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand, grabbed the golden talisman, and looked at it carefully. Zhang Chan said, "Master, this thing is strange, just now, I can't hurt it at all." Zhang Yan thought for a while, and said, "It's very likely that this is the primal gold fixing talisman recorded in the ancient books. When I was talking to fellow Taoist Shi the other day, he also mentioned this thing. It was originally used by the ancient unorthodox cultivators to hide their souls. Don't look at it, even if the people from the heavenly abode were to make a move, they wouldn't be able to get it in a hurry." Zhang Chan was shocked, and said, "Doesn't that mean we can't do anything to this demon?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This talisman can't be restrained by anything, but it's only afraid of the real fire of Red Sunday. After I use it for a few days, I can gather the fire of heaven fire qi and refine it into real fire." He pinched it with 2 fingers, took out a talisman, and stuck it on it, suppressing it and preventing it from escaping. He threw the talisman into his sleeve, and the next thing he had to do was to go to the gushing spring continent and collect the demon's body. But without the protection of the demon's qi, the gushing spring continent would definitely be flooded, and he had to move it away first. He thought for a while, and called the 2 dragons over, and said, "Wait for a while, first create some waves, then change into the appearance of the mountain god that the demon toad transformed into, and go to the gushing spring continent to announce that the flood is coming, and then move these mortals to the island that I created that day." The 2 flood dragons immediately accepted the order, removed the golden fetters, and then left with the wind and clouds. Chapter 898. The 2 flood dragons obeyed the order and arrived in the sky above the gushing spring state. The 2 brothers exchanged a few words in the sky and then separated. One of them shook his body and transformed into the appearance of the demon toad, while the other went down to the lake and activated his mana. Not long after, the river below turned around and started to make a ruckus. However, the leading flood dragon looked at it and said unhappily, "Second brother, what are you doing? Did you not eat your fill last time?" The flood dragon below was also depressed. If it was somewhere else, it only needed to stir up the wind and clouds, and any kind of huge wave could be set off. However, the western continent was sparse in spirit vigor. Even though he had increased his supernatural power by several times, it was still not enough. For a moment, he felt that he had lost face. He was also naturally arrogant. He roared angrily and said, "Big brother, just watch." He let out a deafening dragon roar and dived into the depths of the water. The surface of the sea was calm at first, but not long after, there was a faint sound of water gushing. After a while, dark clouds surged in from the sky. The waves of the 1,000 instant lake rose up and down, and the waves rolled angrily. The flood dragon in the sky was satisfied. That's more like it. Brother, hold on here. I'll go greet the people from the gushing spring state. When he finished, he turned around and flew into the state. Although he didn't know the way, he didn't need to guess to know that the place where the king of a country lived was the most prosperous place in the country. Thus, he stared at the flood dragon's eyes and lay on the cloud to discern the aura. Then, he found a city in the south. At this moment, the sky was drizzling and the water was misty. There were thousands of palaces and bridges. The bridges were connected to the water and the pavilions were endless. He was in the form of a demon toad now, so he did not avoid anything. He flew into the air and entered the palace wall. He saw that there was a Taoist temple at the top of the mountain, with a small hill to the north, and a star platform was built on top of it. At each of the four corners were fully-bellied copper toads squatting on guard. Wisps of green smoke floated out from their mouths, sometimes gathering and sometimes gathering. It was a place that was meticulously arranged to nourish spiritual energy. He knew that this was not the work of a mortal. It was most likely the work of the demon toad. Hence, he floated down and landed on the platform. There were hundreds of soldiers guarding the platform. The leader of the military academy sensed the commotion and rushed up to the platform. He recognized the mountain deity and quickly knelt down to pay his respects. He said, "May I know why the great deity is here? Are you going to perform a ritual today?" The flood dragon asked, "Is the king here?" The military academy was startled. He said, "I don't know. Perhaps he is refining his chi in the pill room." The flood dragon sighed and said, "I'm outside the sky, and I've discovered that there's going to be a flood wave coming soon. It's so powerful that it's hard to control it, and it could drown my continent." The military officer was shocked and said, "What should we do now?" The flood dragon said, "I can open the altar and cast a spell." They only resisted slightly because they suspected that there was a demon behind the flood. However, if they fought, they would not be able to fight. "I'm afraid I won't be able to protect all of you. Go and inform the king that we need to find a way to move to another continent to avoid disaster." The demon toad's clone had been in the gushing spring continent for more than 100 years. After 4 dynasties, the fate of this country had never declined. Hence, the king believed his words without a doubt. He couldn't help but be at a loss of what to do. He immediately gathered his officials to discuss the matter of moving. However, the signs of disaster had yet to appear. Not everyone was willing to abandon their families and leave their homes just because of a sentence. Suddenly, there were many voices of doubt. However, after half a day, a never-before-seen storm appeared in the southwest direction. The flood wave was more than 100 feet high. However, it was blocked by a formless mana, which was why it didn't invade the continent. For a moment, everyone was silent. However, there was another problem. There were close to 1 million families in the country, and they couldn't leave just because they wanted to. Even if they abandoned them, they would have to prepare a boat for the officials and nobles. It wouldn't be something that could be done in a short period of time. 10 days to half a month was considered a minimum. The king had no choice but to send someone to seek advice from the star platform. This was exactly what the flood dragon wanted. It was convenient for him to appear in his dreams that night, saying that he would send them to the other continents, and later when the matter was settled, he would move them back here. He ordered everyone to stay at home and close the doors, not to panic. The night passed peacefully, and on the second day, when everyone awoke from their dreams and opened their doors to take a look, they noticed that they were already on another continent. At the same time that they were endlessly surprised, every household erected the mountain god's memorial tablet, praying for blessings. There was no land or farmland in the new continent. Other than storing food, the millions of families could only hunt and fish for a living. They definitely wouldn't be able to last long. Fortunately, Zhang Yan's move was only to prevent the demon toad from retaliating before its death. After this matter was settled, he would naturally move these people back. The flood dragon's spell also consumed most of its mana. After resting for a while, it met up with its younger brother. It turned around and reported to Zhang Yan that the matter was settled. Zhang Yan listened to the process and gave a few words of praise. The two flood dragons were also proud of themselves. At this moment, there was no trace of anyone in the continent. He could do whatever he wanted. He rode on the flood dragon carriage and circled around the island. After a while, he confirmed the location of the forbidden land. He then said, "Zhang Chan, follow me inside. The two of you guard the outside. Without my permission, don't leave without my permission. If there's anything that comes out, stop it immediately." The two flood dragons responded loudly. Zhang Yan waved at Zhang Chan. The latter immediately turned into the original form of the blood worm and went into his sleeve. Then, he used the earth escape technique and went straight down. After about 1,000 feet, he saw an underground river. At the end of the river, there was an echo from the distance. He followed the sound. After a few miles, the front suddenly widened. He had entered into an empty underground space. It was about 100 feet tall and occupied about a mile. Inside, there were hundreds of natural stone pillars. The two ends of the pillars were big and the middle was narrow. However, the surroundings were empty. There was nothing out of the ordinary and there was no sign of the demon toad. After muttering to himself for a while, he walked towards the center. Below him, he saw half of a broken monument. The rest of the monument had long since been broken into pieces, forming a low mound. Presumably, it was used to seal the sky demons in the past. There were some indescribable mysterious pictures on the tablet. They seemed to be related to the stars in the sky. His heart was moved. He wanted to take a look at the technique of the great underworld patriarch. Unfortunately, the spiritual vigor talisman on it had already dissipated. After looking for a while, he did not see any clues. He smiled and did not persist on it. He waved his sleeves and moved the gravel to the side, revealing a hole the size of a fist. A white gas shot out from his eyes and went straight down. After looking at it for a while, he had a clear idea of what was going on. He immediately retracted the light and pointed with his finger. With a rumbling sound, the soil under his feet collapsed, revealing a slope that extended down into a deep cave. No one knew where it led to. With his feet firmly planted on the ground, he strolled forward. In less than 1,000 steps, he saw a large building deep underground. In front of it was a row of jade stairs, and in front of the main hall was a bronze tripod and incense burner. Above the jade plaque, the words, "Xianyu Palace," could be vaguely seen. On both sides of the rock walls were cave niches, and there were many statues of deities inside. Each of them had different expressions and looked lifelike. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He did not think that the great underworld patriarch would use his mind power to suppress a demon. If his guess was not wrong, these should have been buried directly into this space from the surface of the earth when the restriction was sealed that day. Therefore, these buildings were very likely the ruins of some Taoist sect in the past. However, the matter at hand was more important. After this was over, he could take a look around and see if there were any remnants of the etched tablets. He stood in front of the temple. This was close to the heart of the sealed demon toad. If there was any trap, it must be here. He had always treated this heavenly demon as a formidable foe and did not underestimate it just because he had easily destroyed its doppelganger earlier. A thought flashed through his mind and he said, "Zhang Chan, send the golden bug inside to investigate." As soon as he said this, a golden bug flew out from his sleeve and landed on the ground. It transformed into a pale young man. He bowed and said, "Master, please wait." He let out a low whistle and a large swarm of bugs flew out from his body. They crawled up the stairs and rushed into the temple like a tide. These bugs were only connected to Zhang Chan's mind. After a while, he revealed a happy expression and quietly reported a few words. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. His body swayed slightly and disappeared in an instant. When he reappeared, he was already in front of a large stone pit. The pit was surrounded by a pile of soil about 10 feet high. It was half buried and half buried. There was an object inside. The outline of the object was extremely large. Upon closer inspection, it was a jade toad about 10 feet long. It had red eyes and a round mouth. Its limbs were thick and short. There was a short horn on its forehead and there were thousands of bumps on its back. It looked like a bead curtain. If one looked closely, they could see that it had many tightly closed eyes. Although it was only an empty shell, it was crouching on the ground. Its eyes were wide open and it looked like it was alive. Zhang Chan curled his lips and said, "Master, is this the thousand-eyed flower toad?" "It looks normal. It's just that it's a little bigger." Zhang Yan said calmly, "This monster is different from the other ferocious beasts. Its ability lies entirely in its 1,000 pairs of eyes. Legend has it that when it fights, it can release thousands of rays of light that can weaken spirits and absorb souls. When it goes out, it can illuminate hundreds of miles of land, and when it comes back, it can be restrained by a hair's breadth. Unless you're in the grotto heaven realm, be it human or demon, human or beast, you'll die upon contact with it." Zhang Chan was speechless and said, "It's that powerful?" When he fought with others, he mostly relied on the thousands of insects under his command. He was most afraid of such methods. Zhang Yan sensed for a long time but did not notice anything strange. His mind turned. When he arrived here, he thought that there would be a conflict. Therefore, he was cautious. He did not expect that there would be no movement even after he found the body. He did not think that everything would be fine after he captured the spirit in the golden talisman. With such a sky demon, it was impossible that it did not leave something behind. It was most likely hiding somewhere else. He praised in his heart. This great demon was decisive. It left as soon as it said it would. It did not even care about its own body. However, even if it escaped with the blood essence, as long as it was still in the West Continent, there was no need to worry about it. The most important thing now was to keep this body. He said in a deep voice, "Zhang Chan, I need to use my divine art to convey his words. Retreat outside and protect me." Zhang Chan responded. He immediately called the thousands of golden insects and flew in all directions. With a flick of his finger, Zhang Yan released several formation flags and inserted them around the hole. Then, with a flick of his sleeve, a celestial sound suddenly rang in his ears. A ray of spiritual light flew out like a wisp of smoke and floated into the nose of the monster toad. Chapter 899. Under the corrosion of the 9 subduing magic slip, the demon toad's body was like soft wax, slowly melting away. About 9 days later, it was completely absorbed. Only thousands of smooth pearls were left behind. They fell onto the sand one by one, emitting a faint light. These were all the eyes of the demon toad, and could be considered a rare treasure in the world. Zhang Yan glanced at them, and they all flew out from the ground and slowly floated in front of him. He counted, there were 512 pairs, exactly 1,024 pairs. He circulated his magical power, and after sensing for a while, he could feel a strange spiritual energy hidden within. It was just that at this moment, it seemed to be in a deep sleep, storing and not releasing. It seemed like this treasure was similar to the origin pearl, and it required the heavenly demon's blood essence in order to be of use. But today, other than the few that were sealed in the land of the 9 continents, the sky demons were extinct. Even if he could find the blood essence, it was too extravagant to use it to control these eyes. Thus, he had other ideas. At most, he would spend some effort in the future to open the earthly fire heavenly furnace and refine it into a treasure. Even if its power was slightly weaker, he did not need to rely on the blood essence. With a thought, all the eyes seemed to be summoned, and one by one, they entered his sleeve. After finishing this, he once again turned his attention to the 9 subduing magic slip. After the magic slip had eaten its fill of spiritual essence, it did not fly back like it usually did. Instead, it glowed brilliantly and quietly floated there, motionless. Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly. This jade slip was undoubtedly much stronger than before. He still remembered that when he dissolved Gu Songyao's body, it took a full 18 days and nights. Although the demon toad was suppressed underground for tens of thousands of years, it was still stronger than the black tortoise. But now, it took even less time. He did not rush it, but sat cross-legged on the ground and waited quietly. An hour passed in this manner. Suddenly, the jade slip trembled and emitted a loud and clear ring. At the same time, Zhang Yan's sleeve also trembled, as if something was in a hurry to come out. He did not need to check to know what it was. After thinking for a while, he let go of the restraint. In an instant, a spiritual light flew out. There was a rumble. A 10 devil treasury stood steadily in front of him. The jade tablet flew inside and disappeared in a flash. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and pondered for a moment. He fluttered his robes and stood up. He strode in. Fang Yi was inside. He felt as if he had entered another world, and he heard a loud sound that seemed to split the heavens and earth apart, coming from all directions. Suddenly, 12 towering demonic figures appeared. Each of them was shrouded in mist, making it difficult to discern their true appearance. One could only vaguely see their silhouettes. Each of them was ferocious, emitting a monstrous aura from time to time. As for the 9 subjugation demon slip, it floated high up in the sky. He tried to summon it with his mind, but he couldn't summon it back. There was only a divine will that seemed to want him to choose one of the 12 demon forms. Thinking about the devil transformation divine art from before, a layer of enlightenment instantly appeared in his mind, and he looked around. This was the path that he chose in the demon subjugation scroll. What he saw now was probably the demon body that he needed to form when he reached the 5th realm. Now that the 4th realm of the god contract was already at the perfect realm, it seemed like if he wanted to improve further, he had to follow its wishes. His gaze became a little more serene. If it was really as described in the jade slip, there were 9 great realms in the profound insight method, then it would be a method that led directly to the great way. However, the more one cultivated it, the more one would discover the hidden mysteries within. He needed to think carefully about whether or not to choose rashly would cause an unexpected disaster. Although he had refined the demon subjugation scroll long ago and had to follow his wishes, if he resisted, he couldn't do anything about it. However, to be careful, he still needed to be prepared. He thought about it carefully and had an idea. He opened his robe and released Fan Zhen's incarnation from his bag. He then gave an order in his heart for it to choose. The soul on the incarnation came from his body, and as long as he was willing, he would be able to know what it saw and heard. The entire body was refined by that drop of demon blood, so it would be easy for it to accept this technique. If something went wrong, it would just be one less incarnation. The incarnation stepped forward and didn't hesitate much. It stood still under the demon body in the north. The giant body of the demon body suddenly moved and looked down like it was examining him. After a moment, a bright light flew out from its eyes, like a river. It turned into silver stars and entered the incarnation's body. During this process, nothing out of the ordinary happened. Zhang Yan called the incarnation in front of him and pointed at its brow. Everything that the incarnation saw was known to him. In its mind, there was an additional cultivation technique. He looked at it for a long time and then frowned. Is that so? There were no traps on this cultivation technique. Instead, according to what was written, this cultivation technique pointed directly to the Tao. It had the ability to flip the heavens and earth and had endless changes. However, if one wanted to cultivate this cultivation technique to a deep level, one had to abandon oneself and merge with the demon body. Would the body turn into the demon body or merge with the demon? At that time, even if one had great spiritual power, the person who cultivated this cultivation technique wouldn't be the same person as before. Zhang Yan scoffed coldly and said decisively, "This isn't my path." The moment he said that, the entire area started to tremble. He waved his sleeves and left without any reluctance. Behind him, the 12 demon bodies collapsed. The moment he stepped out of the demon treasury, he summoned with his mind. The demon subduing bamboo didn't resist and flew into his sleeves. As for the demon treasury, it shook a few times and turned into a ball of spiritual light. It was also kept in. Although he decided not to cultivate this cultivation technique, be it the demon bamboo or demon treasury, they were all rare treasures and he didn't plan on giving them up. He thought to himself, I was going to try to enter strength path grade 5 while I was suppressing and sealing the beast. Since I can't, then there's no need to think too much about it. I'll just spend all my energy on the chi path. He made up his mind and didn't think too much about it. He looked at the temple on the platform and with a tap of his feet, wind wrapped around his body as he floated over. This Xianyu Palace should be an ancient sect of West Continent. Since he was already here, he would take the chance to see if there was anything useful for his cultivation. The place where the thousand-eyed monster toad was sealed was between the front hall and the middle hall of the temple. There were many more halls behind it. The middle hall was empty, with only broken pillars and broken walls. He swept his eyes across and headed straight for the back hall. There were 17 halls here, it was huge. One could see that the elders of the sect used to preach scriptures. When he passed by, he entered to take a look. At the start, he didn't find anything, but when he reached the last 2 temples, he found something. There were several skeletons surrounding a few well-preserved Xian steels. However, the strange thing was that most of them weren't in human shape. At a glance, it was obvious that they were birds. Zhang Yan walked a few steps closer and looked at the steels. The inscriptions on the steels didn't use eroded inscriptions. Instead, they were recorded in ancient Chinese. It was said that a cultivator from overseas came to Xianyu Temple and made a bet with the cultivators in the temple to see whose cultivation technique was better. The cultivator from overseas took out an extremely brilliant divine art. In order not to be at a disadvantage, Xianyu Temple also took out their secret divine art. After comparing the two, the cultivator was amazed by this divine art and admitted that he was inferior. However, he wanted to invite the person who learned this art to come out and have a talk. However, what made Xianyu Temple embarrassed was that because of the harsh conditions to cultivate this art, no one had mastered it for thousands of years. They could only summon a few disciples with shallow cultivation to deal with it. The cultivator from overseas was very gentlemanly. He didn't deny it because of this, but he inevitably left in disappointment. Although Xianyu Temple won the battle in the end, everyone in the sect felt upset. Therefore, they carved the process and set up a stele as proof. It was said that any disciple of the younger generation who could cultivate this divine art could become the personal disciple of the sect master. The stele didn't record how to cultivate this divine art, but it explained the general situation. This divine art was called 7 Birds Transformation. They were Heavenly Phoenix Transformation, Azure One Transformation, Golden Rock Transformation, Peacock Transformation, Cloud Crane Transformation, Swan Transformation, and Owl Transformation. As long as a cultivator captured these demonic birds and extracted their bones and blood essence, they could start from the owl, swan, cloud crane, and other demonic birds. Step by step, they could finally achieve the body of a heavenly phoenix. Not only that, but they could also freely transform between several types of birds according to the cultivator's will. What was especially amazing was that this art really transformed the physical body and not the appearance. Even these demonic birds' natural divine arts could be the same. The reason why it was difficult for Xianyu Palace cultivators to master this art was because these 7 types of demonic birds were rare in the world. They were too difficult to find. When Zhang Yan saw this, he let out a long laugh. It was really a loss in the east, but gain in the mulberry. His cultivation of the strength Tao could be considered a powerful technique of his own. It would be a pity if he couldn't improve in the future. In his opinion, if there was a need, he could just use the ordinary strength Tao art. This was also the path that most strength Tao cultivators in the world took. Although the remnant spirit contract cultivation method was different, he had the heavenly phase blood essence. With detailed deduction, it might not be impossible. However, this art had a huge drawback. Due to the restriction of the blood essence, even if he returned to the heavenly phase body, he would not be stronger than its original owner. It would be extremely difficult for him to improve in the future. Although this 7 Birds Transformation did not have a cultivation method, nor did it say where to find it, it pointed out another path for him. Cultivators were not limited to one body. They could transform between many demonic forms. He remembered that among the ferocious beasts sealed by the great underworld patriarch, there was a 10,000-year-old azure dragon. Because it could fight with an ascended perfected being, it was killed early. Back then, Sui Hong could not reach that realm even if he took the body of the snake. However, if he had such a technique, he could first take the body of the snake, then transform it into a flood dragon, and then evolve it into the body of the azure dragon. It seemed to be a feasible path. It was just that it was not easy to deduce such a cultivation technique from beginning to end. However, as long as he knew that it was feasible, he had the remnant jade, the 9 mysterious scriptures, passed down by the great underworld patriarch, and the demonic face cultivation method that also described the